Beware your human heart. This is Diabolical Index for June 8th, 2019, where the pages of the uncanny reside. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for tonight. This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful time. We have the author of Arachnophile, Like Jagged Teeth, The Writhing Skies, and coming soon in October, her collection In Dreams We Rot. I've got horror author Betty Rocksteady from Nova Scotia. How you doing, Betty?
Really excited to be on here. I'm doing great.
Awesome. It is awesome to have you with us. I was just wondering, how does one describe, oh, wait a minute. Before we go any further, I just want to say everybody needs to check out Juice in the Morning. Justin and his fellows are on there, totally mixing it up. And they've actually got a new episode that just came out, so definitely check out Juice in the Morning. He sent over the bumper, and it just slipped through the cracks because I was so excited to get this going with Betty. And also, I wanted to apologize because I want to make sure that I get your guys' questions in, as well as my own questions, and everyone's questions who sent them in. Thanks for everybody for sending in questions. And so I'll be looking at it in a few directions. So there you go. But
I love that people wrote in and asked questions. That's great.
yeah, absolutely. And, I think that sometimes people, I think they avoid emails for whatever reason, and I had used that, but I also had some coming in from Messenger and that type of thing,
Cool.
so it was helpful. But basically, let's see. Anyhow, ooh, somebody's freaked out by your dolls.
Okay, that's
Excellent.
fair. That's
Perfect.
fair.
Huh? It's just Betty's dolls. They're commenting on them, and I think I know which one they're talking about. I can
Yeah,
see her right away.
Corky's looking over my shoulder there.
What's her name?
That's Corky.
Oh,
He is one of the dolls that like Chucky was based on, pretty much. He has a cassette player in him. He can talk.
oh boy. I
And a
remember I used to take
volume.
Teddy Ruxpins and put
Yeah.
Highway to Hell in it and stuff, and it used to work pretty decently. But anyway, the first thing that I had to ask, and this is for everybody else out there too, I was just talking with Betty before we began, and I was kind of going over how, you know, there's so many things that I discover just from like researching the show and just different interests of mine and authors I discover and different subjects and things just from movies and whatnot. And when I found out that she is considered in some circles to be a Bizarro author, she was part of the new Bizarro series. But I've also looked in like some of her interviews when I was kind of getting prepared for this, and some of them she was kind of like, uh, Bizarro mostly, sometimes not or whatever. So I guess my question is, how would Betty, how would you describe Bizarro horror, Bizarro fiction for that matter, and why would you say that you're not quite all the way into it?
Well, like I like bizarro fiction, but my primary influence growing up was definitely horror. And bizarro is sort of it's a genre that mashes a lot of different genres together and like plays with your expectations a lot. There's a lot of surrealist elements in it, which is what I really resonate with, the surrealist elements to bizarro. I think the reason I don't consider myself primarily a bizarro writer is because bizarro is usually really fun, and I
Oh,
don't
okay.
consider my stuff. I mean, there's a lot of pop culture influences in it, and it's cool, but a lot of my stuff isn't really fun. A lot of my stuff is kind of mean, and
Well, I'd have to say that must be a relative thing because I found the Writhing Skies funner than hell.
yeah,
I
it
really
well,
enjoyed that
it's
one a lot.
that's cool. It's a different kind of fun, I guess, because I want to kind of. There's a lot of trauma in a lot of my work. Like it's got to kind of you're having fun while you're getting upset, I think.
Okay, that makes sense.
But like I think Danger Slater would be a really good example of a bizarro fiction writer. Like I think he's at the top of the game as far as that goes. He writes some horror influenced stuff too, but it's just like really high concept stuff, really unusual, like dramatic. My first book, Arachnophile, is the most bizarro of my writing, I guess, and that's about a guy who falls in love with a giant spider.
Which interested the hell out of me. I mean, to sell it, that would be really difficult to do.
It does okay. Like quite a few people have read it. I was surprised by the reaction I got to it. People seem to really dig it. There's a lot of like man spider sex in it. I think those kind of weird sex things are a good bizarro thing too. But yeah, I like the kind of Bizarro, like David Lynch has a lot of, or Bizarro is influenced by David Lynch, I guess. Like
Turning
Eraserhead
this
Press is
nose
the
up.
biggest press.
I can't hear anything that she's talking
Okay.
about.
You want to just point at you?
Never show it.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, so that's Arachnophile,
You say the
and
name.
and it's part of the new Bizarro series, and
Yeah, 2015 that one was.
actually, I had seen one of your illustrations that had kind of an opening. There was a part of an insect that was opening, and I was wondering if that was sort of like a sexual. I don't think it wasn't a spider though. I think it was more almost like a death's head moth or something like that. And the abdomen is kind of
Um,
and there's an eye there.
oh yeah. I don't think that one was supposed to be particularly sexual. It was just kind of gross.
Now it struck me that way. So I mean, there you go. I mean, it's just it's always there's going to be a relativity to all that where people you never know what people are going to be turned on by. So
That's
um,
really interesting, actually.
yeah,
I remember I used to always keep, well, I've always kept sketchbooks, and I remember this one sketchbook in particular, none of the drawings were sexual in it, but several people who looked through it mentioned to me, like, this is really, like, very sexual. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that
and
says more about me or you, or it's a weird meeting in the middle on
I
that.
guess you'd have to say yes. I mean, to all of it, I think that that it would just portray it would kind of just bring to the surface all that kind of hidden stuff. But speaking of that, though, when it comes to like what kind of turns people on and stuff, what would you say? I mean, definitely one of the names that stood out to me, looking through some of the authors that you'd spoken about and stuff, was John Wyndham. I think that John Wyndham may have been one of my favorite authors as a younger man. As soon as I found out that Children of the Damned had been a story at one point,
Yeah, yeah.
I totally jumped in with both feet on all of his stuff, and it kind of made the Day of the Triffids, that B film. It kind of made it. I mean, I love the film already, but as
I
soon as
love
I
Day of the Triffids. That's one of my favorite books of all time, too.
absolutely, as soon as I read the book, I realized that there were a lot of things that they couldn't kind of get across in the film, so they went another direction. But there were a lot of elements to it that went in. But we had a question from Britt C. Gillis, where she had sent it out and she thought she may have been a little bit premature. And her question is: besides the obvious, which is anyone go to BettyRocksteady.com to check out her illustrations. We got a few that we'll be pulling up in a little while, but she's asking, Britt's asking, besides the obvious, which is Betty Boop, Garfield, and etc., who are your biggest inspirations, and what author influences your writing the most?
I really thought about this. I saw that Biddy had asked that, and I usually would say Stephen King would
You're
be
doing
the
the
author that
illustrations
influenced me the most,
whenever
just
you're ready.
because I read him so much as a kid. Like that was my big horror influence forever. But I couldn't really say that my writing takes a lot of inspiration from him. I don't think I write similar to him. I mean, it's a different style. A lot of, but he would be, I guess, a primary influence, and then I've added on my own thing to it. As far as on my art, I really like Edward Gorey. He's been my favorite artist for a long time, and there's a lot of comic artists I like. I like Sam Keith a lot. He did the Max, and I grew
Oh,
up
yep,
reading the
yep,
Max, and that was like,
absolutely.
yeah. A lot of his short stuff is really good too. He did a couple little series. I'd love to do comics someday, but it's just such a big undertaking. Like, there's only so much time, and there's so many projects I want to do.
Well, I think that especially with the advent of the internet, I think there are a lot of different places where you could get that going, and especially like with like the Amphigory collections and stuff like that. I think I only have Amphigory 1, and it was
Mhm.
because when I did work at the Barnes and Noble, they constantly had 2 and 3, Amphigory 2 and 3, or maybe it's Amphigory also. I can't remember
Mhm.
how he characterized them, but they had 2 and 3 forever, and I finally ordered number 1, and someone bought 2 and 3. So for whatever reason, I just had those. And when I was a kid, I used to watch the PBS public broadcasting mystery show, um, and it had the Amphigor or it had the Edward Gorey
Oh,
stuff
right,
as part of
yeah.
the introduction. So I even knew when I was a kid. I may not have understood what was going on in the mystery stories of that time, and even as like Monty Python came on after that,
Mm.
I didn't understand that, but I knew that I loved that art.
Mhm.
Um, and
I think my favorite. I don't remember which Amphigory it's in, but I think it was the West End. It was called, and it's like just a series of drawings. It's an Edward Gorey book of like this really weird house, I guess, or the end of a house, and everything's just very haunting, but nothing actually outright spooky is happening, and it's almost like you're going deeper and deeper into the house and just seeing little glimpses of weird things. It's fabulous. It's my favorite.
And that's where that relativity comes in too, where you might have 20 people that see the same drawings and they get different things out of it. They remember a grandmother's house, or they remember some church they'd spent time in as a kid. You never know what people are going to pull from that type of stuff. And sometimes when you don't quite give them all the information, or let them know what to think and stuff, they might end up getting a much deeper appreciation for it than you expect.
Yeah, like that piece in particular by him, like he's just creating a mood more so than a narrative, and then with that mood, you're kind of filling in whatever you want to.
What about
It's
Adams? Do
cool.
you like Charles Adams?
Oh yeah, definitely. I have a couple of his cartoon books, not a ton. I'd like to have more.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm kind of pumped about that. They're doing like a CG animated Adams Family that kind of takes
Yeah.
after. And a lot of people, it was interesting. A lot of people weren't pumped about it because they didn't kind of take after the Raul Julia Gomez, which is fantastic.
Well, yeah.
I miss Raul Julia so much because I mean that was kind of like the first introduction of that guy to a lot of people that I knew, and I had been watching him forever. So to see him kind of to get into that was awesome. You had talked about Stephen King. I would have to say that I didn't glimpse any DNA from Stephen King in your writing at all. So,
No,
so
I wouldn't.
you've definitely, if there was an influence, it's definitely not so much of an influence that it puts fingerprints all over your work.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I like about his writing that he does, but I think it's just that there's just so much reading of Stephen King when I was a teenager. It's hard not to think of him when people ask who my
Oh yeah,
influences are, because he's an
yeah,
influence on Betty, you know?
sure, absolutely. Um, when it comes down to that, I was curious about postpartum, the story
Hmm.
postpartum, and when it comes to an author who has to write under specific themes. I was under the impression that postpartum was written specifically for the Eternal Frankenstein,
Yeah, that's
that
right.
that collection. So did you approach that and you had kind of a, since you were writing under that, was that collection just kind of like twists on the Frankenstein theme and you had to operate under that? Was that difficult for you?
Um, I don't know if it was difficult, but I definitely thought about it a lot. Like I reread Frankenstein and thought about some of the themes and what I wanted to do with it, because I didn't want to do exactly the same thing as everyone else was doing. Um,
Which I would imagine
so
would be
yeah,
difficult. That'd be a concern because, I mean, there are definitely a lot of themes in Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, but it seems like after a while, if you're not careful, you might mimic or accidentally mirror a lot of the stories that were going to be going in there.
yeah, and so I went with really like the act of creation and the act of completely inspired creation, and then also the thing about rejecting what you created, which is what Dr. Frankenstein does to Frankenstein. He creates them and rejects them, and then with postpartum, I guess just from the title, you can kind of guess at the themes in that story.
Absolutely.
Um, and then the woman in that goes really crazy with taxidermy as well, putting together a strange new creature. So it was really fun
Fantastic.
to write.
Yeah, I have to say, I wasn't able to get that one before we met, but I'll definitely be looking for that collection. It's Eternal Frankenstein with the story postpartum. We have Natalie was asking about, or she said it sounded awesome. So um, I I'm trying to do a visual and text companion to the show, and I'm going to see if I can't get a lot of the links and the things that we've talked about up on there in the
Great.
next couple of weeks for people and stuff like that. But yeah, I would imagine that in some ways, writing under the constraints of a theme or whatever can be fun in some ways and difficult in others.
I
Um,
actually really like it. That's kind of how I started. Like I only started writing about 5 years ago. I just started writing. Right when I was turning 30. I was like, well, I guess if I don't start now, I'm never gonna start.
yeah,
So most of the time, while I was teaching myself to write, it was just I was writing for calls, and I would just look for prompts that interested me. and write for that. So that's kind of, even now when I'm creating my own ideas to write, I'm almost giving myself a prompt, you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can see that. I think that's with Stephen King. It kind of, I'm not gonna say it pains me to say it, but it just seems like almost such a pat thing to say that
Hmm.
Stephen King wrote, in my opinion, one of the best books on writing that there is, and it's called On Writing, believe it or
Yeah.
not. But if you haven't checked it out,
Half that
I
book is
definitely
about, he,
recommend it.
yeah, I have read that quite a
Oh
few
yeah.
times. Um, I love, I loved reading about Stephen King and about how he writes. I don't know if I feel like I got a lot of like technique for writing from it
Oh
or
really?
anything like
Cool.
concrete that I could use,
That's
but
interesting.
I just find his voice very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with him, it's going to be, you're going to get his history, like
Mhm.
part and parcel with everything that happens, and I usually kind of preface it with that and say, hey, one of the best books on writing you can get, in my opinion, is On Writing. But you may, if you're not looking to know about Stephen King's life and how
Oh yeah.
a writer was created, then you may want to move along because he talks about all that kind of stuff a lot. But with the, okay, it's perfect. He put up the illustration I wanted with can you explain this? Can you see that
I can't
illustration?
see it now.
Okay, it's the one with kind of like got a couple of creatures carrying a girl on a gurney down the road, and there are different demons and
Oh,
things looking on from the woods.
okay, that one is actually, that was a commission for my friend Erica instead on Facebook. She let me put it up as just an example. She just wanted, I forget what she wanted a cartoon style drawing. And so I decided to make her the queen of the monsters.
Oh, Queen of the
And
Monsters, cool.
yeah, so they're just kind of like carrying her around and she's hanging out.
I didn't even think about that. To me, it looked like a gurney, but I guess it could also be that like regal um, cart or whatever. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's almost like
They could,
a that's gonna bug me now. I almost said scrimshaw. That's not the name of it. Rickshaw, where
yes, yeah.
they kind of carry you around. But yeah, now it totally makes sense to me. So in the vein of that, are there, like with the vintage cartoons? You and I had talked about that, about the kind of like the Bosco and like the clown in the moon and stuff like that. Do you think that kind of terror can wear a cute face and kind of, I don't know, I guess put you in a false sense of security, and what can you get from that? Do you think that a lot of those black and white cartoons kind of have like an air of menace to them?
Oh my God, they definitely, that's why I love them.
Okay.
It's that weird feeling of things not being quite right in them. I don't know, like I just love them. They're a lot of fun. I grew up watching, like Betty Boop is my main focus, and
Oh, absolutely. I saw the quilt. Awesome.
yeah, my Grammy made me that when I was a little girl. And like the tall cartoons, and Bimbo is my favorite. He's Betty Boop's little dog boyfriend. He's
Okay.
great.
Awesome.
Um, but yeah, they all have like a very strange. There's a very surrealist thing to them. You know, animation was just getting started, so it's not smooth like the animation we watch now. It's kind of blocky. They're making it up as they go along, but it's just like raw, surrealist creativity, and it definitely has a weird sense of menace to it, and I love it. It's cool.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I just wanted to, number one, I wanted to say, hey, Josh LaForge is on, Natalie's on, Robin's on. Happy birthday, Robin.
Hey, happy
Um,
birthday, Robin. Thanks for being here.
oh, you would love you some Robin. I'll have to
I
send
bet
you
I
a
would.
photo of her from the last the meeting the Black Books meeting I was at. She became Eva, I think, is it Eva from Ghost Story, and it was
Oh,
chilling.
cool.
It was chilling. But hey, Natalie, let's see. Angela is on. I think that Emily made it too. So we have a good little crop of people.
Oh, that's fun.
Um,
Cool.
and while they're here, I wanted to definitely put it out there that since we're talking about kind of like the menace of cartoons and stuff, you've had a new little venture that came out, podcasting, and why don't you talk about that and what it has to do with?
Yeah, my buddy on Twitter was looking for someone to do a Popeye podcast with him. So what we're doing, it's called the Popcast. We just did the first episode, and it's about the early Popeye comic strips, and so like from the early 20s. and they're really cool and weird. And this dude knows his Popeye. Like I cannot believe how much he knows about Popeye. And
Oh, it was
I don't,
amazing when I listened to that. I think it was the first episode.
yeah.
What kind of blew me away was this guy's acumen. Like he totally and I I didn't feel quite so bad because a lot of times when I'm talking about something and it has to do with someone has a really distinct voice, I tend to say it in that voice, and he can rock that old school Popeye voice.
He could do all.
Um,
He had like three different. He had all the impressions for all the different Popeye voice actors. Like
it was
it was
crazy.
so cool. I had no idea what I was getting into really. Like he was just someone I'd found him on Twitter when I was like looking for other people into cartoons, and I was like,
Okay.
oh, this guy like imitates Popeye in his statuses. That's cool. Like he just spells everything like Popeye
Oh,
would say
okay.
it,
Like the
and I was like,
phonetic
yeah,
Popeye
I'm
stuff.
into this. So, and as I'm into those cartoons, when he was looking for a co-host, I was like, yeah, I'll jump on that. So I don't know him, so I didn't know like, what am I? But then he's just like super like knows everything, all these voices, like super well prepared. It was so fun. I really, really liked it.
You totally sold me. I thought you knew him for ages with the way
No,
you guys got on. So yeah, you totally yeah, forget all that, everybody. She's known him forever because
we're best
uh
friends. Me and
totally
Troy.
it
Don't know his
totally
last name.
and maybe it's one of those things where birds of a feather flock together because you
Hmm.
just there was no doubt about it. I thought you guys had been fast friends for years. So
Yeah, no, that was the first time we spoke. Like we just,
unbelievable. But
it
yeah,
was cool.
definitely everybody check out Popcasting. I found it on SoundCloud. Is it anywhere else?
I don't think it's up on iTunes yet, but he is working on it. It just came out a couple days ago. He uploaded on SoundCloud. His Twitter is at everyfan3417
At
or
every fan at 3417 for Troy. Is that right?
for Troy
Okay.
Blackwood, I think is his last name,
Okay.
Popeye Otaku.
Oh,
So,
Papayo Taco. Yeah, I heard him say that. Yeah.
yeah. So,
But and it's cool because I was always a gigantic fan of the oldest, like the older Popeye ones where they would constantly be talking during the fight.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
so I'm
like
definitely good.
I like the old Popeyes where you can't understand what Popeye's saying. He's just
Yep,
kind of that's a terrible
absolutely.
impression. You go to Troy for your Popeye
No,
impression.
it's okay. It's all right. Um, but yeah, so what I didn't want this to get away. And I guess it's a little bit off topic now, but I was thinking with when it comes to things like these beautiful bones and or is it dusk urchin,
Dusk Urchin, yeah.
urchin, and the postpartum and stuff. Do you find yourself more at home with the short form type of stuff
Oh,
or more?
absolutely.
Okay,
Well, the longest thing I've written, I think, like I don't think Writhing Skies was much more than 30,000 words. So that's about where I top out. I've written three novellas and everything else short. And I've always liked short fiction a lot. Like I grew up reading like going to thrift stores and buying collections of horror fiction. I read a lot like the Pan books of horror stories and yeah, I just love short fiction. I find, especially for horror, the tension stays better. You don't have to hold back for as long. I don't know. I think horror works really well, shorter.
that's so cool that you mentioned the pan collections, Natalie. If you're still here, uh, I sent her a cover from one of it was like the year's best or something from a pan collection, and it was just this open mouth with this really garish lipstick and these worms just like squirt like this big clot of worms inside the mouth. I
Yeah,
send that
I
over
think
to
it's
her.
Dave. Did Dave McKean do a lot of? Is that his name? He did the Sandman covers and some of the Sandman art. I think he did a lot of the Pan, some of the new Pan
I
ones.
would have to say that McKean definitely wasn't on the one that I saw because he kind of
Okay.
has that collage style almost
Yes.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that wasn't on there, but yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Might be thinking of something else.
I totally agree with the short stuff. I think that there is a kind of like a I don't know. There's a little bit of a mistaken thing when it comes to short fiction being easier in whatever. I think with short fiction, I think that if you have kind of like a circular narrative that you want to get back around to the end, I think sometimes if you don't have a whole lot of time to do it in. But then again, people really like flash fiction, so I think that it becomes a challenge. There are challenges with both sides of it, I guess.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I just find like my attention span for reading is not as good as it used to be, unfortunately. So I find reading like an 800-page novel, even it's just not as plausible for me now. Like that's a lot of hours to put into reading. So I tend to gravitate towards shorter novels even for reading.
Do you think that that might have? Do you think that there's a? Do you think that horror has become kind of like conservative a little bit in the last little while?
I guess it depends on what horror you're reading or listening to or watching or whatever. I don't know if I would say that horror is more conservative. Do you find that?
I don't because mostly I would have to say that I read a lot of older stuff, so
Mhm.
I don't. I'm not so sure that I've come. I mean, like most of the people that I read who are within the last 10 years or so, they're indie authors and stuff, and they break every
Yeah.
boundary known to man. So it's difficult to say.
That's
But
kind of what I'm thinking too. Most of what I'm reading is indie as well.
hey, sorry, hey Wade from Oregon, rock on, man. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi
Sorry,
Wade.
go ahead. Oh, and
What
Ben,
was I
sorry, Ben, Robin's husband, Ben is here, and he's a total card.
Hi Ben.
He can wear a top hat like nobody's business. But anyway,
Nice.
sorry.
What were we talking? Oh yeah.
I'm sorry. There we go
Last
again. And I said we were going to be focused. I should have known better.
um I don't know, like when I was last time I was reading like horror fiction just like off the shelf at the bookstore would have been like in the mid 2005, 2007. I was reading a lot of Mo Hader then, and she wasn't very conservative. She's crazy.
I think that I've seen the covers. I haven't read a single one.
She writes some really weird stuff. A lot of people with tales in her books, residual
Oh,
tales.
okay, okay.
Yeah,
So, but
and
you
very
mean
like
it's not so much like a So you say tales not in kind of like a fantasy fairies of the woods. You mean like this vestigial tale
yeah.
of the. Okay, I gotcha.
Her stuff was really her. She was really cool. Like you mean conservative in like what way?
I guess afraid to kind of like break the mold of the past, like especially
Mhm.
now with the uh, since we're so hell bent on nostalgia. I went into nostalgia a lot last
Oh
week,
god.
but since we're so hell
I
bent on nostalgia, kind of thumbing your nose at that and trying to go in something completely foreign to it,
I actually
that type
really
of
agree
thing.
with you there. I know a lot of people are really into nostalgia, and I won't, like, if someone's enjoying something, go ahead. But I agree that it's not really my thing. I don't need to see a bunch of. I'm kind of over, like, 80s era coming of age stories, you know? I've just had enough. I'd like to
Well,
see, yeah, more modern things. Like, modern times are really scary. We can do a lot of scary things now.
and maybe that's I try not to get too much into movies because I'll just go off the rails, but um, I'd have to say, in my opinion, I think that when it comes to because we were kind of talking about horror literature and stuff, I would say that horror cinema, I think that it's a renaissance. I think that
Yeah.
we're getting back to some really, especially when in the '90s you had kind of what I call like the teeny bopper slashers and stuff,
Mhm.
which was I think that they thought that they were doing a little bit of a transplantation from the 80s into 90s, but there was something a little even more bubblegum about
Absolutely.
that
I know
stuff.
exactly what you mean.
But now, when you have something like Midsummer coming out, it's even though some people would say, "Oh, it's the Wicker Man all over again," but when Jordan Peele says, "Oh, this is going to be the stuff that people are going to have to the high watermark that people are going to have to get to rise to this level." When someone like that says that, with a lot of the work that he's doing, even though I mean it's so unbelievably downright political,
Mhm.
I think that means something, and and a lot of the horror is so divisive when it comes to the fans and stuff. So, but anyway, totally segueing on that. I had a question about mainstream influences that you have that you can see like bizarro elements in plain sight. Can you think of any of
Yeah.
those?
Um, I don't Well, like as far as mainstream, like David Lynch is back. Like the Twin Peaks has obviously got a lot of bizarro elements and surrealist elements. I was thinking too about Mother. Did you see that film?
I didn't. And I love Aronofsky. So that is Aronofsky, right?
I am not sure. I'm not great with
It's
directors, really.
okay.
I think so, yeah.
I think that it was, and I love that guy, and it seemed like they had taken such a strange.
It was
Um,
really weird and cool. It made me really scared and claustrophobic. Like it had a lot of, I don't know, it seemed like it was gonna be set up to be a normal movie, like not normal, but like more realistic, and then it went like about halfway in, it went very nightmarish, dream logic. Like it felt like it was lifted out of one of my dreams, actually. One of my, I don't know, it was really strange, and I definitely that kind of nightmarish logic is something I associate with Bizarro.
well, that okay. So that brings me to something that I actually meant to put in my notes and I forgot. So I'm glad this kind of came up. One thing that I was going to talk about was I saw a book that came out. I think it was like FNK USA. Some I think it was Entertainment Weekly put some sort of ad up for it and stuff, and it talked about how it was kind of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy mixed with like Ready Player One, and I kind of looked over the synopsis and stuff, but it said a novel, you know, and it makes me think that a lot of maybe is there like a stigma to having the genre like horror or dark fantasy and stuff like that. Do you think there's a stigma to putting that on your book? And because I've seen a lot of books coming out lately that are most definitely horror and or dark fantasy, and they're calling it kind of like magical realism in some cases, and it kind
Yeah,
of like comes under the radar.
I do see a lot of that, and I see a lot of people talking about that stuff, like those kind of genre discussions. And I don't really think about genre a lot when I'm writing or when I'm reading, or when, like, I just don't really care about genre, you know?
I
I
think it's a
want
good way to
to,
approach things because then you don't have that kind of like filing system. You're not classified into that file.
I just
You
feel
can go
like so
wild.
much of that stuff all blends together so nicely anyway that it's kind of silly to be like, well, this one is this and this one is this and this. Like horror and science fiction and bizarro and magical realism, like all those things are just pieces of the same thing, I think. It's
Absolutely.
mostly the emotional impact that I look for, and it's one that I associate with horror because I just like that feeling of being uncomfortable, I guess, or being shocked or whatever it is I like about horror. If I can get that feeling, I don't really care what they're calling it.
I mean, especially when I've seen a bunch of collections like they kind of pass around in middle school and high school where it's supposed to just talk about like the different levels and the different sophistication of different kinds of writing styles by different authors and stuff, and they just kind of put it under fiction there. But there's definitely there are so many where it can just take place in someone walking down a road, like country road, but for whatever reason you're just terrified, and it could
Mhm.
be it could be absolutely anything. So
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's
it's
important.
just I think it's silly when they like people are trying to be like, well, it can't be horror because it's too literary or whatever. Like, why everything can be
Oh, that's
literary?
horrible. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And I think that I made this really big dramatic post about House of Leaves the other day because I avoided it for so long because it just seemed like it was such a gimmick
It's a
to.
rough. There's a lot to it. Like I really like House of Leaves, but I don't know if I'll ever read it again. It's just so much, you know.
But then as soon as because I'm obsessed. I love codes and puzzles and stuff. So as soon as I kind of found out the depth of the determination and kind of like the devotion to making this kind of making the it's almost like performance art. Like the reader almost
Yeah.
has to go through this little bit of puppet mastering because like a lot of times, I mean, an author is definitely a puppet master for in one way or another. But in this case, when you actually have to physically turn the book around to be able to read it and stuff.
Because he was telling different stories on like multiple levels and multiple ways of telling the story, and then it all fits together in your head in its own way. Yeah, it is a really cool thing to have done.
And I saw something where the author also has a sister who's a musician, and if you listen to some of her songs, it gives you clues to the stories, and
Oh,
it's just
cool.
someone who puts that out in so many different ways and so many different levels and layers and stuff. I have to respect it. So one of these days I will be studying that book. But
Jonathan Rab, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name, just put out Ghoul Mountain 4 through Turn to Ash Press, and they're doing kind of a similar, like they're releasing a lot. It's a book about, it's supposed to be the novelization of a horror movie, but there's also all these notes in the book, like footnotes about when he was writing this book, all these crazy things that happened to him related to the movie, and they released a bunch of video clips. Like they're doing a lot of weird multimedia, multiple ways of telling that story with it. I haven't finished reading it yet, but it's a really cool concept.
I love that stuff. I love
Yeah.
putting it all out there in different ways. Would you what would you say? Well, we were talking about kind of like the definite influences. What are some influences that that happen to your work and on you that people might be surprised about?
Yeah, I saw that. I was thinking about that question, and like, I don't know how to answer it because I'm just so obvious with everything that I like, and that I don't know what would surprise people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there's anything that unusual.
Well, maybe it's the normality. Like if someone says, "Oh, Betty would never watch that Dragnet episode because that guy is so white bread and he's so rigid and stuff," but it just so happens that that guy like informs some character that you put in there. You just never know.
See, I don't know. I can't think of anything like that. I listen to a lot of indie rap, and which people I kind of look like maybe I listen to punk. I think so. Maybe people wouldn't expect that, but I really like Aesop Rock, and a lot of his lyrics have kind of come through in my work. Like every now and then, I might just take an idea off a little piece of a line of his. In my collection in Dreams We Rot, I wrote for another press. It's 55 short stories of 55 words each, and a couple of the titles of the stories were Aesop Rock lyrics.
Oh, okay,
So
that's cool.
yeah, yeah,
That kind of reminds me of if anyone's ever seen Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, that that movie. They have like kind of like chapters in the film as if it was chapters in a book, and they're all named after
yeah.
Raymond Chandler books. I thought that was so totally cool when
That
that
was really
happened.
cool.
But oh, good lord, horror is the person we depant. I am
What?
wearing pants on this show. Angela said that horror is the person we depant. I am definitely wearing pants on this show. But speaking of things, are there any totems that you have to have? And I'm not talking about cats, but are there any totems that you have to have on your person or in your vicinity when you're writing in order to make it work?
I am honestly such a boring little writer in the way I write. It's very like it's not all romantic and everything. Like I don't have totems or light candles or put on music. Like I really just sit down at the computer and type stuff. Sometimes I put on music. But yeah, no, I don't get all fancy about it at all.
Well, in that case, I was actually thinking about a question from Natalie. She was asking about what's the weirdest place that you've ever kind of had the inspiration or and actually weirdest situation that inspired, weirdest place that you've ever written from, or inconvenient place, that type of thing.
I did. I wrote a whole story at work once, but that's not that exciting, I
Yeah,
guess.
that I
But
mean,
yeah,
but I wouldn't say exciting. Not being exciting. That's not what I thought of. But I would actually think that I would be really surprised if people didn't write a lot at work.
yeah.
I would think that
It's
was a
when you,
more.
I get ideas everywhere though. Like I'm always texting myself ideas from wherever I might be. And I like brainstorming in different places. Like as far as writing, I have to just like sit and type at my computer, but in the brainstorming process, I can kind of take that anywhere. And I like to go for walks or just wherever I might be. If I'm waiting for something, I can kind of make some notes or whatever.
Oh, that makes total sense. I worked at a casino one time, and you have to go around and painstakingly empty. That was back when they used like tokens and stuff. You have to painstakingly empty all of these machines, and you'd have to walk around and stop and do it all night long. And I made all kinds of story notes during that time, because I was just
Yeah, that
wandering away.
I think that kind of idle time is really good to have when you want to write. Like, if you're doing something that you're kind of bored of and it's not taking all your attention, that's when your mind can kind of it can kind of go. You're not distracting yourself by looking at your phone or whatever. You actually have the time to let connections happen in your brain.
Sure. Um, do you find yourself kind of like? Do you really get in when you're thinking about something? Do you really get in the zone where someone could walk up and touch you and you'd be miles away?
Um, Maybe a little bit. Yeah, like I don't like to be interrupted when I'm writing at all. Like it has to be just like I don't write for huge stints of time though. I usually get things like I have things brainstormed out really well. And when I'm writing, I am just forcing myself to sit down and write my rough draft. Like I hate writing a rough draft. I don't know, it's boring, it's terrible. I don't feel like I know how to write anymore when I'm trying to do it, but you have to put it down so you can fix it. So, yeah, I usually just time myself. I'm like, okay, I have to type for 15 minutes and that's it. And that's how I do things.
I think
Chip away at it.
I think it's a discipline that everybody has to have. It seems like I was trying to really avoid. We talked about this about asking all the questions that everyone who ever interviews an author always asks, like, "How do you do it? Where do your ideas come from?" And I think that usually when people are asked that when they've done a lot of writing and stuff, their answers are usually kind of biting, and it usually is something like, "You just do it. You do it
Yeah,
when you can."
they don't come from anywhere. Like, I don't feel like ideas come, well, I get a lot of inspiration from dreams, definitely. But as far as ideas, like you make them. You have to make them. If you want them, you make them, and sometimes they'll come on their own. But mostly, you just do it.
Oh yeah, and this goes out to Ben. They didn't call us showgirls. They called us tassel boys at the time. So do with that what you will. Anyway, okay. Everybody wants to know, when was the last time that you were scared out of your wits, and what happened when you were?
I went down for a little walk by the water the other day. I have a little trail, and I can go down by the ocean. It's not really the ocean; it's the harbor, but it's nice. And I was walking back on a gravel path, and there's a car driving down it. And there's not usually a car driving down there, and he was driving really, really
Oh my
slow.
God, Stephen King yet
I
again.
know. I was like, I'm going to die. And so he just kept like going slow, and then he stopped ahead of me, and I'm still walking. I'm like, this is terrible. Like this guy's
Oh
gonna murder me.
wow.
I really felt like he was gonna talk to me or say something, but he was just looking at his phone.
Oh
He was
okay.
driving slow because he
Oh,
was texting.
does that slightly disappoint you? Because
Maybe a little bit.
I know that you said that a lot of dreams and I mean I imagine probably with most writers, but dreams and situations come into play when you're putting this stuff together. That would have been some great fodder for that. Did you write anything from that?
I wouldn't have minded a little bit of a weird encounter. I do like a weird encounter. I don't, I didn't want to be murdered, but if he said something kind of strange and I was like, "What the hell just happened?" Yeah, that would have been all right.
Well,
I
I
like
mean,
weird.
you would you have gotten in the car with him?
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, well in that case, that totally makes sense for what I was going to ask next. Like, what's a risk that you've taken in your writing that was totally against your better judgment at the time, but ended up benefiting you in the end?
Like a real life risk? Or do
No,
you mean like in my writing
just in
itself?
your writing, or
I think Arachnophile definitely was like before Arachnophile, I wrote that I was doing a bunch of workshops with Garrett Cook, who was the editor of the New Bizarre Author series, and he approached me to write something for it. And I don't remember exactly how we got where it was, but I'd never written anything sexual before Arachnophile. I'd never written anything really gory. My everything I was working on was a little bit tame, just starting to bleed into surrealism. And then with Arachnophile, well, I mean, like I wrote a whole novella about a guy having explicit sex with a giant spider. So that was definitely new.
so
um,
would you say was that like a was that a conscious leap where was that a conscious leap where you were just gonna go? I'm just gonna go for it.
Yeah, because I definitely struggled with the idea. Like, it was obviously the right direction for the book to go in. Like, I trusted his judgment, and it was weird, and it felt right. But it was just, I was still dealing with, like, I was a new writer and figuring out what I wanted to write. I knew it was horror, but I didn't know what kind, and I didn't know how deep I wanted to go, I guess. I didn't know where my barriers were, but now it turns out I don't really have any as far as gore and weird sex.
Oh
So
yeah, there
that's
there are burning barriers like in your wake now at this point. I don't think anyone could say that that stuff holds you back or you're squeamish about going the full nine when you have an idea that you want to get out there.
yeah, and I feel good about that. I mean, that was the kind of stuff I always read and the kind of stuff I like that really affected me reading. And I don't know, it feels good, kind of like a release to write weird shit.
Okay, in that case, there was one that when I was coming up with stuff, I was really looking forward to, and I'll just go ahead and do it now. Let's hear the most vanilla description of one of your works that you can think of, as if you were gonna put it in Reader's Digest or Better Homes and Gardens. If you had to make a description, if you had to do a little summary of one of your works to go in that, where little old biddies all over the universe would take a look at this and would have to, it would
Oh,
have
to
to be
make them
palatable
like,
to them.
I guess Rising Skies could just be the struggle of a young woman trying to escape an emotionally abusive relationship.
But see, that's cheating a little bit
Is
because
it cheating a little bit?
you
Because
got
we're
to
not
have
touching on.
like you could could you say something like overrun by Kroger bags? Or
Overrun by.
I guess Kroger bags doesn't make much sense to you, but Nova Scotia, but plastic bag. There are plastic bags all over her house. I mean, I guess you could do something like that, right?
Or like
Jello, or she has a
Jello.
unnatural fondness for Jello.
Yeah, a young woman with maybe something about like aquatics, like she's really into aquariums.
There you go. That
Sea
makes sense,
creatures.
right? That
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay, cool. Yeah, I was really looking forward to that one. Um, have you ever attempted adapting any of your stuff for film or television yet? We were talking
Um
about Black Mirror earlier, and it sounds like that might be just a ticket.
yeah, I was talking with there's a local filmmaker who's done some short films. I helped him edit. His name's Brett Holmes. I helped him edit one of the scripts for one of his things, and we were talking about doing something with Arachnophile, but like it's just a lot. Like a lot of them are pretty high concept, I guess. So yeah, no, it's something I've gotten into seriously, but I would be interested in doing it. I think even like a short film or an animation of something might be cool.
I was actually going to ask you about the animation thing. Have you ever tried to animate any of your drawings?
No, I was talking to a friend today actually, that's just started getting into animation and he's doing some really cool stuff. I think that would be cool to get into. Um I'd love to make. Oh, you know what? I did in Lost Films, my story Elephants That
Oh,
Aren't.
sure. Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up. I really wanted to ask you about that one. I'm not really familiar with that, but I've seen the name around a few places when I was researching this stuff. So tell us a little more about that.
Well, in Elephants That Aren't, it deals with a woman who is kind of possessed by weird elephant cartoons. And
Oh,
in
okay.
yeah, in the corner
I wasn't
of
expecting that.
not like possessed, but it affects her life. She a clip of a cartoon just makes everything crazy, and she brings a film in to a class, and everything goes nuts. But in the upper corners of the print copy of that book, and in my collection, it's going to be done like that too. I did little elephant flip book. So
Oh,
when you flip the top,
fantastic.
the little creepy elephant just kind of moves and slushes around or
That's
whatever. He's gross.
wonderful. That is
Yeah.
wonderful. Did you find that the publisher was that a problem?
No,
Um,
because it was PMMP,
oh,
Max,
okay.
Ruth, and Lori, and Max and Lori are really good. Whenever I'm like, "Hey, can I do this?" They're like, "Yeah."
That is
So
awesome.
yeah, I don't know if anyone would have gone along with it, but they were totally up for it. And Lori is an excellent, like she does all the formatting and everything, and she's great at it. So
I can't tell if the messaging is still up for me. Um, yeah, Ben actually mentioned being terrified by Stand By Me. Um, and I wanted to mention that Max. What's his last name? I forgot.
Max Booth?
Max Booth. Yeah, how could I forget that? Is that Max Booth the third?
Yeah.
Okay, he does a wonderful Stephen King based podcast called
Yeah.
Castle Rock. Um,
I've been on that like a bazillion times.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I listen the hell out of it now. As soon as I found out that existed, I went after it with both feet. So yeah, so Max has this wonderful publishing company called Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing. I tried to say it last last week and I just
Go
butchered
bring
it.
some good guns
But
and shield.
You did
and
good this time.
and they have a wonderful what's that? But they have a wonderful zine called Dark Moon Digest. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That is a great magazine. I'm going to plug that a little because you can get a subscription, an ebook subscription for only $1 a month on their Patreon, and it's so good. And
wonderful.
it's a great place to submit to, and every issue is really, really good. I have a print subscription to it.
Well,
And
that's interesting that you say that. I contacted them and I was like, "Hey, what's the likelihood of getting archive editions of this in the physical
yeah,
magazine?" And he said, "Well, it'll be expensive." And I was like, "Well, I kind of like the tactile thing, and I mean, of course, right?"
yeah,
But
I think
yeah,
I've been finding that too. And it sucks because like I don't have a ton of books money right now, and obviously, especially getting them shipped to Canada, paperbacks are much harder on the pocketbook than ebooks. But I do seem to like I process books better. I think when I have a physical book, it's easier for me to read them.
well, I kind of I equate that to Netflix, where with Netflix you can turn something on, turn something off, leave it behind, not even paying attention. I think that when you have a VHS tape or a DVD or a Blu-ray, you actually have to go through the ritual of getting it out and physically
Mhm.
putting it in. I think that you're more likely to have a stake in it
Yeah, I
when that
think
happens. You
definitely.
can't discard it quite as easily. So maybe that's silly, but that's kind of way I see that with as a very very abbreviated way of describing why I like regular books. But
That's cool.
um,
Yeah.
let's see. Let's see. Have you ever done any prompt writing?
So do you mean just like writing to a
Well, I guess
prompt?
when you have I mean, I guess the postpartum was sort of like that, but in
Mhm.
this case, kind of when you're like writing with a group and they issue a prompt to get a story out of you, just like in a limited amount of time in person, that type of thing.
Oh, in person. That sounds really fun. I don't have a lot of writer friends in real life, but now I want to do that with them. I do. I can
I
think
have
of
to
a
say,
couple.
if I ever get it back together again, um, I had a writing workshop at one point, and we worked on nothing but prompts in it, and then after a while, there were so many of them that wanted to draw, and so many of the artists that wanted to write that we ended up kind of making more of a comic clinic out of it.
Oh, cool. Me
But before we did all kinds of prompt writing.
My friend Mary Jean and I, a bunch of years ago, we used to always write comics together, like
There you
just
go.
kind of little, yeah. So we would give each other titles all the time. We would just text each other titles, or we'd sit together and write to titles, and we would just do like a little page comic or whatever. This was before I got really into art and writing. It was just fun then. Now it's like fun and business.
Well, I mean, you kind of have to find the fun in the business too, and all that kind of stuff. But
Oh,
I can imagine.
absolutely.
Are there any living or dead writers that you'd want to do that kind of workshop with?
Um, yeah, actually, I was talking about Mo Hader earlier and
Mm-hmm.
like Gillian Flynn, those kind of writers, like Gillian Flynn did Gone Girl. I
Oh
love
yeah,
those like
I just saw something about
big,
sharp objects earlier.
yeah. I like they both have like a lot of weird trauma in their books and but they're also big and they're organized in a way that I don't know how to do yet. So working with someone like that would be really cool. I think like someone who has that kind of experience write a big fat book where there's a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would imagine that, like we said with the short form, I would imagine that having someone around to kind of like walk you through the paces of doing a long form thing would be interesting too.
Like Max Booth and I, we keep talking about writing something long together, but like he's a like he's a very busy man with his bazillion projects, and like I am too. So we haven't gotten to it yet, but we've been talking about doing like a big like sleeping sickness book of a large scale.
I have to say, now that you mentioned sleeping sickness, I think that I can see you writing something, especially when it comes to like the time period. If you can do like a period piece, I could see you do something about that. Like, I think it's called like hysterical dancing. Like when they
Yeah.
had those like gigantically long like dancing marathons and stuff.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I see that being working. I don't know if it's like a Betty Boop type thing, and she just kind of like
Oh shit,
falls
yeah.
down
Okay, I
dead.
wasn't on the right page
But
with you first when you said it, but as soon as you added the Betty Boop idea, yeah, I'm there.
okay, so there you
I
go.
can
That
see
makes
it
sense,
now.
right? Um, with writing, do you ever hate it? I mean, do you?
Um,
How do you
I guess
pull out of the if you? How do you pull out of it when you hate it? I'm sure that I know for a fact that there are some writers that are listening and tuning in, and I'm sure that they would love to hear how you kind of get out of funks of that magnitude when you think that it's just kind of too much to bear for one day.
um, I mean, I try to give myself a reasonable schedule for things and only work on things I really want to work on. Like I said before, like I hate writing. I love brainstorming. I love editing. I don't like writing. So it's always a struggle. So
I'm
I
glad I'm
just
not the only one.
yeah, so I just do it so it's done. And I think the best way to do anything that you don't want to do is just do a little bit. If you don't want to do it, make your goal smaller. If you're like, oh, well, I can't write all this today, well, don't write it all today. Write for 5 minutes. Or, if you don't want to draw a big picture, draw a little picture. Like, just do littler things. I don't know, even like I used to have a lot of social anxiety, like so much. And even like going for a walk would have been completely I don't know. I just would have worked myself up about it too much. I've been like, I don't want to. I'm not going to do it. But I just started walking to the post office, which is 2 blocks away, and now, a few months later, I'm like, I can do anything on my own. Like, you just got to make a little goal.
That's great. I think a lot of people, especially if they want to like create these giant vistas and create all these characters and fashion it all together, I think that they uh, might kind of operate from trying to do things bigger and better, and they may kind of forget about the nuts and bolts and maybe
Yeah.
like the first step is part of it and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, when I first started writing, I wrote a lot quickly. I was writing like pretty much like a flash fiction story size, around 2,000, 3,000 words a week. And like they were all terrible, but you just have to finish them.
I'll leave you can just push the end button right here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I,
Is that
I
not
was I
Oh
was
yeah,
with you.
no, that's cool. I was just saying, yeah, when I first started writing, I just started with very short things because, your first thing is not going to be any good. Or, the longer it is, the more you invest into this thing that you don't even know what you're doing yet. It doesn't work. So you just, start small. And if you don't feel like writing what you're writing, just, I don't know, I find having a plot line worked out helps a lot for me. I know a lot of writers are pants writers, but I'm definitely not
I'm
because
sorry. What
like
was that last part you said?
oh, a lot of writers are like pantsing writers where they
What's
just
that?
I think that's the term for when you don't outline first, you just kind of go by the seat of your pants.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never heard that term before. That's cool.
Yeah, a lot of I mean that's like even Stephen King, that's the kind of writer he is. You just kind of let it develop how it develops. And that doesn't work for me. I don't have that kind of
I think I have to
I
have
don't know,
something to go by.
yeah, I like to have it all worked out first, so I know what I'm doing, and then it's much easier to make force myself to write the rough draft because I'm like, well, I just have to make this happen. It doesn't have to be good yet. I'll make it be good next time, but it just has to happen first.
Okay, a lot of people have been asking me this, and I guess it needs to be asked. Like, where did Rocksteady come from?
Oh,
Please tell me, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
okay, of course I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but actually, I mean, mostly 100%, it just sounds cool. That's why I like it. It sounds great. Betty Rocksteady, much better.
Okay,
Um, I think I was in like my mid 20s and going home after like a shitty night out in a cab, and I was like probably kind of drunk. I'm not a big drinker, but mid 20s, and that
okay,
song Black Betty came on,
perfect.
and and there's a part in it where it says she's so rock steady,
There
and
you
I was
go.
like,
Yeah,
I should,
yeah. She's
yeah,
always
I was
ready.
like,
I remember that. Yeah.
I should just be Betty Rocksteady, and then I changed my name on Facebook, and when I started writing, I was like, yes, this is just what it is, and Yeah, I
See, that's
really like
very
being.
cool. Like you made it sound so pedestrian. That's very cool that you would get it from there.
Yeah, I really like being Betty Rocksteady. I think it sounds good. It's catchy. It
Absolutely, yeah.
feels good.
Because this actually this is one of the questions that came from Natalie
Oh,
Brown.
wait. My name is actually Betty, though. Sorry.
Oh
My
yeah,
first
no,
name is
yeah.
actually Betty.
Sorry,
Okay.
I should have clarified that too. But yeah, her
Wasn't sure
name
if
is
that was
definitely
obvious.
Betty.
Yeah.
But the Rocksteady is the handle.
Yes.
But Natalie Brown writes under Sinister Sweetheart and her endeavors, and we were talking about kind of like the pitfalls and some of the benefits of having pen names and all that kind of thing when it comes to your work, and she asked about that
Cool.
about
Yeah.
Rocksteady. So, um, do you? I think you said that you outsource all your editing to Max?
Um, no, like I do most of my. I try to get a pretty well edited draft anyway. He does generally read everything after I've written it, but I think like we're just good friends,
Okay.
and yeah, he does. I guess he does kind of go through everything, but mostly I do it myself, and I just let whoever is editing the anthology or whatever it's in do a last pass on it for me.
Okay. Do you have a seeing as how uh, the redditors are so prevalent now? Is there a favorite perspective that you like to write in?
I think my default, I generally end up doing third person past tense. Just I like to keep kind of a close lens on it though, like just on the one person, as into their head as I can get.
Okay.
I like writing in second person, but it's tricky and you
Ooh,
can't rely on it
such a
too much.
rarity. Such a rarity. I've only seen
I
one second person story in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I have. I think there's one in my collection, and
Oh, you know where
I
I
quite
saw it?
like it.
I saw it in Weird Tales. I was
Cool.
looking through a Weird Tales compilation. It was in there.
Very cool. Yeah, I like second person. It's neat. The book I'm writing now is first person present tense, and it's the first time I've written in that, and I'm liking it so far. It's kind of cool.
Okay, I have to ask also. I saw a title pop up in some of the stuff, and I think I only saw it in one place. I never saw it pop up again, um, and it kind of has to do with another weird question. I'm trying to have the writing stuff and also some different a little bit far reaching and more internal stuff. And one of the questions was a cat lives. Is
Oh
that
yeah, the cat lives.
is
That
that
was
still in there?
pardon?
Is that still going on? Is that past?
So what happened there? I was writing a series. I ended up writing two stories. It was going to be a collection called The Cat Lives, and it was going to be all interconnected, weird cat mythos and the titles because all the cats were going to be safe. Because in so much horror fiction and movies, as soon as an animal shows up on screen, you're like, that animal's going to die. That
Yeah, I
animal's
mean,
going to die
I
cheaply.
don't know if that's like a Chekhov's quote unquote dog situation. Like if an animal shows up, chances are it's not going to be good for him.
Yeah, and it's just used as like a cheap emotional manipulation or whatever. So I wanted the focus to not be on that. I wanted, this weird mythos. I ended up taking a break actually because my cat died.
Oh,
My
I'm sorry
cat
to hear that.
Stevie King. Yeah. So that was rough, and I ended up taking a writing break because I was sad, and then I was doing a shit ton of art commissions that for
Okay.
the whole year, and I was working full time, and I just had to take a break somewhere. And when I came back to writing, I just wasn't. The cat lives has kind of gotten stale on me. When I leave something alone that long, I just wasn't feeling it. So the two stories that I wrote for it were super cool, and they're in my collection. And
Oh,
I
okay.
think,
All right.
yeah. So those stories exist. Actually, one of them was released lately. I've published both of them. One was in Dark Moon Digest, and the other was in The Outward Inn, and that was you can
Mm-hmm.
read that one online. But yeah, they're
Is that the
both in.
Nimbus? Backward
Pardon?
Path of the Nimbus?
Yeah, that one.
I put that all over the place, and in fact, everybody, I'm gonna attempt to get as many of these things onto a questionable appendix
Yeah, cool.
is going to be the thing. So I'm gonna try to get the perpetual motion machine printing on there, and as many of these books and different things we talked about. I'll try to have links and images and as much as I can possibly do It might take me a minute, but I'll get it all on there. So I have a feeling that a few of the people here are taking furious notes, and I really want to make sure that I get that out there. But I think it's safe to say, I bet that from what you've talked about, a lot of people can kind of guess. But you like cats.
I do like cats a little bit. Yeah, I don't mind cats.
Yeah, I think that that's like the the understatement of of all eternity. But I did have a something kind of occurred to me, and that is it just kind of like to pose this to you and see what you have to say, especially as a writer and as a creative person. Cat, let's say for the sake of argument, that cats had never existed ever in the history of the universe.
Okay,
What
no.
would your favorite animal look like then?
It would probably. I really, really like an octopus or a squid. So, but I would miss the fuzziness. So, what about maybe like an eight-legged little fuzzy thing would be cool? You know, about
Okay.
cat size, but 8 legs, and they can crawl up walls would be probably my favorite animal.
I can't decide if that would be more creepy or less creepy. I kind of have a thing where it's like the more legs, because I've actually had. I worked at a vet one time, and this dog was about to get loose, and I ended up scraping my way. It was a gigantic dog. If I let go of it for a second, it would have just run, and it would have been an insurance nightmare. But I was scraping past this door, trying to make sure he didn't get loose, and this egg sac exploded on my arm, and
Oh no.
I mean, it must have been thousands of baby spiders were all over me. And I had to I was like, because I would have to say everybody has a little bit of arachnophobia.
Oh, absolutely.
I would say that anyone who, does that. I see this video from time to time where this lady is just smiling in the camera and she opens her mouth and this gigantic spider crawls out.
I know
I
that one.
would have to say that even the people who do that kind of stuff at one point they must have had a little bit. And in my opinion, the more legs it has, the more creepy it becomes.
Yeah, I mean, like, I especially like there's something about 8 legs, man. Like octopuses, octopi, and squids and spiders. Like they're just so alien. Like they're just so different from human, and I think that's what really creeps us out. Like it's just such a different everything, different way of moving, different. Hmm.
I mean, especially when you think about, I've thought about that before. It's like when you have, I mean, in any kind of writing, you try to like see it from the point of view of some insane thing that you couldn't possibly see the point of view of. But I mean, especially, I bet in Arachnophile you had to do a little bit of that anyway. But I mean, if you've got 2 arms and 2 legs and you're used to moving those kind of independently and stuff, but then double that. Like, how on earth could your brain possibly translate all these things that you're doing, and then all of a sudden you put that into a sexual situation with a human man? So it's like,
And like I played
how
it really
crazy can you
straight
get?
with Arachnophile too. Like I know it sounds like goofy, but it's not really a goofy book. Like it's very serious. um,
I
the
mean,
spider.
was he like, oh, Charlotte, Charlotte, please, Charlotte?
He is in a relationship with a regular woman, and there's giant spiders everywhere. They don't talk or anything. They're just giant spiders, and they live in society, and that's just
Oh,
what.
okay.
Yeah. So he is actually a huge arachnophobe, and he hates spiders. And his girlfriend talks him into making friends with the neighbor, and he ends up in a weird sexual relationship with her. The spider doesn't like talk or do goofy anything. She is the alienness is still between them, but something happens between it. The spider, she does art with like webs and plays music and stuff. It's cool.
You
I
know, I
tried
can. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I tried to really make it like I tried to really understand spiders and make it as if spiders were just larger and somewhat human, but not at all anthropomorphized, just living among
Okay.
us.
I'd have to say that that kind of I really wondered how you could possibly sell that, and I think that really works if you kind of think of it as something that exists along with everyone and kind of has a life and has a house and all this kind of stuff. I think that makes it much more relatable. I think that for as strange and and outre and all that kind of stuff to say, this guy, fucked the spider. But like at the same time, if you say, well, this could just as easily be just some person over
Yeah.
here. It just kind of looks different.
I really like the concept of, like I said, like the alienness between them. And he was afraid of and disgusted by spiders, but underneath that, he found like this weird eroticism.
Which I think is totally, that's a totally viable psychological thread.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it came out pretty cool. I mean, like it was an early book that I wrote, and it was weird, but I'm definitely proud of how weird it is.
Sure. What was her name anyway?
She didn't have one.
Oh, she didn't have a name. Okay.
The spider didn't have a name now.
No, like clickings or anything like that. Any kind of like mandibles clicking. Oh, okay. Would you find in that case that names don't have much importance in your stuff?
That's not something I've really super gotten into. No, like I don't layer a lot of meaning into names. That might be something I get into in the future. But right now, I just kind of look for a name that sounds like it works with the character, and that's about as deep as I dig into it.
Well, sometimes it can be, sometimes it can cheapen everything if you're not careful.
I really agree. A lot of time, name symbolism is it's such an obvious symbolism.
I mean, how many damn Canes can there possibly be in villainy? It just, sometimes it almost makes you want to just drop it as soon as I see that Kane is involved. But I think that happens a lot. There's a fantastic, I think that it's cracked.com, and they do this video on trends in names in things. And it's totally right on the money. I recommend it. It talks about that stuff. But would you say that there are trends in horror that you would want to get rid of?
I am not, like, everyone's gonna hate me for this, but I like.
No one is gonna hate you. You wouldn't believe how many people are like singing your praises in the comments here. They are totally in love with you. Your Amazon is gonna snap in half from everybody buying your stuff. So don't even worry about that. But go ahead.
For me, like the whole nostalgia thing isn't really my thing, and a lot of times when I see something, even though I've seen some good movies of long ago periods, I find when something takes place in the past, I'm just kind of like, eh.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
I'm not that into the past, especially if it's the long ago past. That mood doesn't hit me right. I like, I don't know, I just want to see modern stuff.
So, I mean, does that, because I remember thinking, and this is movies yet again, but I think it's just because I haven't read a ton of what I would call, I guess, big box modern horror, except for Tremblay, Paul Tremblay and Nick Cutter. I've read some of their stuff, and I have had it on here, and I've enjoyed that a whole lot. But I think that it's difficult, especially with Cutter. It's difficult to avoid some of the comparisons that I've thought of with them, and but at least it's not quite as on the nose as some other things.
Nick Cutter did The Troop, right? Is that?
That's right.
Am I thinking? Yeah. And Tremblay's.
I hope I'm saying it right. I feel weird saying Tremblay. It makes it sound like he's nervous.
I pronounce almost everything wrong. Honestly, I'm not very. I read more than I talk, I think, so it's fine.
I've met some people that interests me. I'm actually a little bit surprised that no one's written a story about someone who has just learned a language through reading and goes out into the world and pronounces everything wrong.
That would be cool, yeah, because that's definitely a thing. But I don't mind. If someone corrects me, I'll just fix it next time. It's all good.
Can you imagine somebody coming out to Dr. Satan's chicken shack or whatever it was called and walking up to him and saying, "Oh, Captain Spooting, how are you doing?" I'm not so sure that he would, or maybe he would laugh. It's hard to say. I don't know.
He'd probably laugh, but then he would probably murder you.
Yeah, Rob Zombie. That's a whole other can of worms. Yeah. not a fan. But
Oh no, I like a few of his
well,
films.
I think it's okay. We are not going to talk about movies.
Okay, okay,
I've fallen into that trap so much. In fact, at the very beginning of all this, when they had me on to do the book thing, all I could think of was it was like, if there wasn't a movie, a horror movie channel already, I would have totally gone for that. But okay, I went through that. Now I'm just looking. What would you say? Is I'm looking at all these things down there, and oh my
Oh yeah,
gosh,
see, I
these
can't see any of that. I don't know
these
what anyone's
you're gonna
doing.
love it if you come back to it. You're gonna love all this stuff. But they really
Fun,
get up to some hijinks in the comments. But
fun.
yeah, it's definitely their playground. This isn't a tangent, Ben. I'm getting back to it. But do you find that the 21st century? Do you think it's a more fertile ground for like kink to kind of expand itself with the horror genre and different story and stuff like that, or do you think that there's a hidden? Um, do you think that there are even stronger manacles on that kind of stuff now than it was before, but it kind of uh, hides under this facade of acceptance?
I mean, it's hard because like so much of what I'm reading and writing is like indie horror, so it's hard to know what's going on in the mainstream realm. But like as far as indie horror goes, yeah, there is a lot of weird sex stuff in there. Like I don't feel restrained in my writing, and I feel like yeah, in the 21st century, people are a lot more open. There's a lot more acceptance of so many things as there should be. So yeah, I feel like now is the time for cosmic sex horror.
Oh, cosmic sex horror. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That was an awesome. I think you should just go for that instead of being, kind of like yoked by the Bizarro thing.
Hmm.
You should just say, "I write cosmic sex horror," and
As
then
much
that's
as I
just the
can, I
thing.
do say that, but just some of my stuff doesn't have sex in it, so it's unfortunately I cannot be bound even by my own genre.
Okay, I don't normally make demands, but I demand that you make a T-shirt, sticker, poster, whatever that just says "cosmic sex horror,"
Yes.
and on the back it's got Betty Rocksteady, and
Holy shit.
and there you go. And maybe
I
even
feel like
have Max come up with it and just have that be the Betty Rocksteady perpetual motion T-shirt or something like
Max,
that.
are you listening? I hope Max is
I
listening
hope
to
he is
this because
too.
that is my demand.
There you go.
I agree,
Awesome.
that's perfect.
What is your current to be read pile?
I am reading
But what are
an
you? What do you want to read? What's on your pile that you haven't dug into that's
oh
sitting
that I haven't
on your
gotten to yet.
bedstead just waiting to?
Nicholas Day's at the end of the At the end of the day, I burst into flames. That is next on my list.
Okay.
And Ghoul Mountain 4, I started Ghoul Mountain. That's when I was talking about that it has those weird like asides in it and stuff,
Okay. So
sort
when
of
you say
similar to
Ghoul Mountain 4, are there four of them, or is it just using that as like a
No,
sequel a
it's
sequel
like
thing?
it's the novelization
Okay.
of this movie that was
Gotcha.
never actually. But that is a longer book, and as I said, I generally stick to 200 pages and under. I like the novella length. I like to be able to sit down with a book in an afternoon or two and be done with it. So that one's gonna go on the docket for when I have a little more free time. But yeah, at the end of the day, I burst into flames. That was nominated for the This Is Horror Awards as well, and
Oh, you
it
mean the one that
oh the
this is horror
one
award that you won last year? Is that the one you're
yeah
talking about? The novella of the
the
year?
award that I just won a few weeks. Yeah, that
Hot.
was really exciting. I didn't think that I was going to win anything this year, but I did. I thought next year was going to be my year. I don't know why. That's just what I was saying. But yeah, I'm feeling really good about it.
So what's the do you fear the sophomore slump, or are you just going
No,
after it?
I feel like I'm just going to keep getting better. I don't know. I feel really good about writing and where I am, and even when there's setbacks, I'm just going to keep going.
Awesome. What would you? Who's the most unexpected character that exists in fiction that you would love to put in one of your stories?
Humpty Dumpty.
Okay, I'm interested. How does this work? Is he like an
Um,
ovary?
I just love Humpty Dumpty. I just think he's really cool, and I don't know how I'm going to use him yet, but I definitely have to. I don't know. He's weird. Do you my first date with my boyfriend, we
All right.
watched our it's a cartoon from like the 30s of Humpty Dumpty, greedy Humpty Dumpty, and he builds this golden tower, and it's just like Humpty Dumpty's character design is disgusting. Like he just looks gross, and the color is bad because it's those early color cartoons, and just everything's very uncomfortable. And there's something with that feeling. I need to recreate. I need to do something with Humpty Dumpty. I don't know how yet, but
I've never heard of any golden tower associated with Humpty Dumpty, but I've also heard that there's a lot more of that rhyme than normally gets out there. So maybe it's part of that. I've never seen that cartoon or heard of it at all. I'm interested now.
yeah, it's like one of the it's like 6 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever, and Humpty Dumpty is a king and he has all this money, but then he looks up at the sun. He's like, "Oh shit, the sun's made of gold. I need all that too. Let's build a big tower." And then he makes everyone build a tower, and he goes dancing up the tower,
You
and
know, that part
then
about the sun being gold, that sounds familiar to me. So maybe, I don't
yeah,
know.
and
Maybe.
like the colors are just because they only had a like the color palette was so limited and had those weird like dull shades. Oh, it's perfect. It's the best. So then I knew Steve was the guy for me because Humpty Dumpty, and now here we are.
There you go. Awesome. Um, is there something that's followed you around your career that you've done that's good or bad, whatever, but it's always kind of haunted you in one way or another for better or for worse?
I mean, the thing that changed my career was definitely Arachnophile, writing that and changing my approach to writing. That was the first one where things got more personal and passing my own boundaries, I guess. And so going into weird sex in that is kind of what now I'm known as a weird sex writer, definitely. Like people associate that with me, and yeah, I feel okay with that. It's
So
cool.
now, do you feel the need to like rail against it and go in a totally different direction due to people kind of expecting that from you now?
Like just write really, really bland sex scenes
No,
of completely
I'm not saying that.
normal.
I'm not saying
No, no,
that,
I
but
know.
if you were to write something that just didn't have a lick of sex, you know,
I
no
just
pun
want
intended, but a lick of sex in there.
I just want to write whatever I want to write.
There
So
you go.
like Arachnophile had a bunch of weird sex in it, but like Jagged Teeth didn't have any. The Writhing Skies had a bunch of weird sex in it. But the book I'm working on now isn't going to. And in Dreams We Rot, some of those stories do. But yeah, so I just want to write everything. If it needs weird sex to make it what it is, then definitely. But if it doesn't, then that's fine.
It's just great to hear that. I think that I would see someone maybe thinking that you felt the need to have it in there, but it's so awesome to just hear you, just justify and say, hey, it's going to be what it is, and anything else is going to be gristle that gets cut off and discarded. So that's
Especially
awesome.
like I don't know, especially in the last year or so, like I've realized that like I really want to write. It's really important to be writing and making cool stuff. But I only have, I have the rest of my life too. Like I'm not just a writer. I'm a person who writes. So I have to work on what I really want to work on. Like the thing that needs to be the next thing. I can't just do what people expect me to do.
It's
It's
really
more for me.
it's really interesting that people who have made books are less likely to call themselves an author than someone who has just written online. I've
That's
seen people
very true.
who call themselves authors online. You know, uh,
Like Betty Rocksteady author instead of Betty Rocksteady kind of thing.
no, but what
I
I'm
feel like
saying, no, what I'm saying is that I've seen this push for people who may have written some, I don't know, some 2-page thing online to call themselves an author, but people who've written multiple books call themselves a writer. I think that might be like
yeah,
a really important distinction.
that's
I think
interesting.
that
Yeah.
people might, there might be some kind of weird, um, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe trying to like put a king's robe on when they haven't really done the
Mhm.
work. But speaking of doing the work, are there any authors that you think need to be recognized more widely and they're not?
Um Jessica McHugh is awesome. Her book The Train Derails at Boston, that was released through Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing a few years ago, and just like everything about it's perfect. It's just like a brilliant horror novel, and I feel like everyone should read it.
Did you review that
Um,
one?
Probably, yeah.
Because
Because I read
I
it.
could have sworn that I saw your name attached to that somewhere.
I didn't blurb it or anything like that, but I definitely reviewed it on Amazon and Goodreads after I read it. But yeah, it was really, really good. Max's writing is great too. He just had a book out from Fangoria not that long ago, Carnivorous Lunar Activities, and I'd love to see that get
Yeah.
some more. It was good. Did you read that? It was so good.
I haven't read it yet, but that's kind of how I've been trying to think about how I even got introduced to everybody and in a detached way or whatever. And I think that I may have seen that book, and then I found out about Perpetual Motion, and then
Hmm.
I found out about the Writhing Sky, and then I got the preview, the Amazon preview of the book, and then I think I went back and I found out about Castle Rock, and then I asked him about Dark Moon Digest. So just like one thing after the other, and I
Everything
think
they
that's
do
how
is
it came around.
so cool. I'm so happy to be involved with those guys, like to have books with them, and I don't know, they're just everything they do is cool.
Have you done any travel that's assisted in your writing?
No, I don't travel. I am such like I live in Sydney, Nova Scotia. It is a very small town. And yeah, I don't travel a lot. Like we bought a house a few years ago, and I don't know, vacations aren't really my thing. So we're I'm here. I'm writing here.
That rocks. I think that a lot of people don't that they can't really understand from a writer's point of view what it's like when you create a character and completely put flesh on the skeleton and have them walk around and do their own thing. Are there any characters that you've created who later on, when you looked at them, you barely even recognize them?
You know, it's funny that you ask that and say that because I have seen a lot of writers say that as well, express that they feel like their characters are their own things and they get totally out of control. And I just, I think maybe because I do so much planning and brainstorming beforehand, all my ideas are fairly like they're in there, and my characters don't undergo those they don't get out of my hands that much really, except for smaller set pieces and stuff.
It sounded to me like since all these other writers say this stuff that you've achieved a level of perfection that they just can't get near.
Oh,
You
that's
don't
very
have
nice.
you don't have any of these problems that all these people have. What's okay in that case? Then they always talk about killing your darlings and whatnot. What's the favorite line? Your favorite line that you've ever written that's stuck with you that you could just recite verbatim.
I had this short story in Forbidden Futures, and it's called When She Came, Everything Fell Apart, and it's one of my cosmic sex horror stories.
Forbidden
And
Futures. Oh, darn it, I can't remember her name now. I'll have to remember her name. I'll ask about it again because I saw someone had posted that they had gotten into Forbidden Futures. I think that she ended up on the front too, and she's got three words in her name. I'll remember it. Maybe Emily. Maybe I can't remember now.
I'm not sure.
But yeah, I've definitely heard of Forbidden Futures.
But honestly, yeah, actually, honestly, just the title is one of my favorite things I've written. When she came, everything fell apart. That line, because it resonates really well with the story and has multiple layers of meaning, and I
Oh
just think
sure,
it's cool.
absolutely. Um,
Titles are very important.
so okay, so this is interesting to me. So uh, names don't hold a whole lot of importance, but
Hmm.
titles do. So what do you
Definitely.
think? What do you think that says about you? Now
Um,
this is the psychiatrist part of the show where I don't actually ask anything. I just take what you've said and turn it back on you.
I don't know. I think like titles are important because they really set a mood and it's the first thing the reader sees. And you need to give them idea of what to expect and to make them want to read more. Whereas names, like I guess personally I don't pay that much attention to names when I read or when I'm watching a movie or anything. Like I'm the worst because I'll be having conversations with Steve about a movie we watch. I'm like, the main guy. Like we just watched it and I already forget the name of everyone.
Let me just hit the stop streaming.
Excellent. Um, but
But yeah,
but
since I don't retain names, I guess I don't put that much importance on them, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's what it is.
well, I mean, when a lot of these characters end up being called like Raven Bloodwind, I mean, like sometimes it's like, come on, but then you tend to go to the opposite direction and just call somebody Bob. Like you kind of have to you have to put it in that sweet spot. Because sometimes for me anyway, I totally differ. I am obsessed with having the right names.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, it's
So if you could rename my character, my main character in Rising Skies, what would you name her?
I think that I would name her um
I'll put you on the spot.
let's see, maybe like Patty Manowar or something. Something like that. I don't know. It's difficult to tell because that one, it would be so easy to fall into the. I mean, I guess you could do something like you could take some of the Lovecraftian names like Whipple and things like that. Or, Horatio Whipple or something like that. But I think that it would show. I think they
Yeah.
would stick out like a sore thumb. So
Yeah, I think that's my concern with like names is making them stick out too much does the opposite of what I want.
yeah, I can see that. But I think that kind of like lends itself to this idea of the character kind of writing itself.
Mhm.
Because if you give it too much, like I've always had this big thing in my head where if someone's named Todd, if someone's named Chad, or something like that, it seems like they're almost always a Todd or a Chad. There's no, they can't get out from under their own name. So,
It might be kind of
um,
fun to play with those expectations then, like to give characters those kind of names, but then make them someone totally different than you expect.
I think that'd be fantastic, and you very rarely see it. If you give someone, I mean, this might not quite work, but if you give someone something I call like a waitress name, like Mabel or something like that,
Or like
but
Betty or something.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, that one, and they end up being like a physicist.
Mhm.
I think that would, I think it'd be great. I think that you rarely see it though. So.
It's funny how much we associate traits with names when like, your name is just something that was given to you.
That's one thing. I gotta. Whoa, the dogs are going crazy. Um, um, okay, that threw me off. I've always had this weird. I've always thought that juniors are weird when you
Junior?
when you name your progeny like directly after yourself. Um,
So
I
does that ever go like what if yeah, that is weird.
well, I mean, I think that I think that long ago it would have been different because there was such a emphasis on kind of like following in footsteps and stuff. But
Do you think the
now,
junior ever goes away? Like can you be like a 75-year-old junior?
I think absolutely yes. I've known guys who go by junior in their 70s and stuff. So that makes sense, I guess. But I think that even in that, like with Max, how he goes by the third, I think that the third somehow holds this weird intrinsic clout, whereas junior kind of almost like shrinks you in some ways. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say with that, but how do you feel? I mean, it seems like you have like a strength about your work. So one of the questions was, how do you feel when someone enjoys or critiques your work? And it seems to me like if they enjoy it, you're happy. If they critique it, you take it. You know, you use the critique and see, look it over and stuff. That's what I would say from the way you seem to be.
I mean, yeah, that is a very good. That is pretty much exactly it. Yeah, it's awesome when people like my stuff. I don't expect everyone to like my stuff. Like, I don't think it's for everyone. I get that it's its own thing, and but yeah, I think it's awesome when people like it. Of course, like everyone loves that. As far as critique goes, like I'm not. People shouldn't like give unasked for critique. But like I wouldn't want someone to just come directly to me and be like, "Hey, that fucking sucked. I hate your writing." Like that would be very rude. But
Well, I think that a lot of times with that kind of jazz, and I'm sure that you've experienced this, where someone will say, "Oh, I hated that," and you'll be like, "Oh, really? What'd you hate about it?" And they'll be like, "I don't know. I just hated it." I think when people
yeah,
do that, and I think that every once in a great while, you'll find yourself feeling that. But I think that anyone who has any kind of deep feeling about something ought to be able to go, I don't know what it is about this that I don't like, but I'm going to find out. I'm gonna try to
Mm.
figure out what it is that's kind of rubbing me wrong. And once you've kind of figured it out, then you never know. Like you might end up, we actually had, I think Angela's still here. Yeah, Angela. When the meeting for Ghost Story happened, I wasn't so sure that she was a gigantic fan of it at the very beginning, but after the discussion kind of went in, there may have been some things that kind of became a little more clear to her about the way she may have been taking different things and saw it in
It's
a
funny
different
how that can
perspective.
happen, eh? Like just with a little bit more context can really change the way you view a work. As far as like bad reviews and that kind like that doesn't bother me at all. Like I don't like everything, so I wouldn't expect everyone to like my stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter if some people don't like it. Um and I don't know, sometimes I get useful stuff from critique. There were a couple of reviews that made me look at things in different ways, and yeah.
What would you say is a good example of that? Where at the beginning you
Um,
weren't a fan, and then they're bringing up this book that I took on the prologue of it, and the prologue it rubbed me the wrong way, so I set it down, and I made it pretty clearly known that the prologue gave me a bad taste about the whole thing, because to me it seemed like the writer was telling you what happened and then telling you what you should be feeling about what happened in a
I
really overt way, and I didn't dig it, and now they're kind of they're bringing it
I
up.
hate prologues. I don't think they're necessary almost ever. I think they're ridiculous. It's just like here's a little boring bit before the book, or here's a little tease of something so I can write some boring chapters before something else happens, and I don't like that.
Hey, Mr. Newkirk, thanks for stopping by. I saw you at the movies the other day, and I was waving until my arm almost disconnected, and you didn't even recognize me. But that happens, I guess. I don't know. This is cool. I'm looking through all the questions, and I'm starting to think that we might have gotten through most of these.
Oh, cool. We did an excellent job.
I was wondering how, if my tech guy has already flown the coop. Andrew walked straight out of here.
Oh,
He has responsibilities, so he showed me what to do. But
cool.
let's see. Here's one. If you could be friends with any of your characters in real life, who would it be?
Definitely the giant spider in Arachnophile. She was very cool.
But how would you
Uh,
refer to her then? You said that she didn't have a name. Like, do you? Actually, that's something I want to bring up. Tangential. Here we go again, man.
let's go.
But hey, I hate it so badly when you'll be reading a story, and I've noticed it with John, Jack, and Frank in movies. And you guys, if you listen, you'll never forget this. Hopefully not. If you're watching a movie and someone's named John, Jack, or Frank, people will say John, Jack, or Frank back to that person when they're talking to them constantly.
Really?
And I hate that in stories where it would be like,
Yeah.
"So how you doing today, Betty?" "Oh, I'm doing fine." "Betty, you should really think about getting your car fixed." I mean, Betty, if you wait too long, the thing's gonna become a decrepit old wreck. I just
Yeah,
for sorry, go ahead.
people hardly say each other's names in real life. Definitely. It's only when you're like first trying to get someone's attention or something. So yeah, it does definitely read really unnatural when people overuse that in books.
Would you say that do you have a favorite dialogue writer?
Um I know Stephen King, of course, is great at dialogue. Max Booth, I really like his dialogue. It reads really natural. Dialogue, I find, is something I'd like to work on more, like giving each of your characters more of a distinctive voice. I find it hard. I think a lot of times mine just kind of sound like me.
Okay. Well, I mean that makes sense though, right? I mean,
Mm.
Lawrence Block, who's a mystery writer, I've mentioned him a few times that he has a real knack for dialogue because um, he kind of taught me that most people talk in fragments of
Mhm.
sentences. A lot of people, especially when you're kind of relating with someone that you know really super intimately, people rarely say, "I drove to the grocery store and got some groceries." Somebody asks them where they've been, and they'll say, "Grocery." Like it's just like one word answers and stuff. But you can't be so
One thing I try to remember when I'm writing like conversations is that like each person in the conversation has a different goal, and
uh
each person probably isn't saying exactly what they mean because people don't usually say exactly what they mean.
Oh,
They
come
have
on.
different.
Have you listened to our conversation tonight? Every single thing we've said, we've meant. I mean, there was
That's
one little
true,
bit
yeah.
of sarcasm in there, I guess, but
Just a little bit. But yeah, so you kind of have to think of where each person is coming from in the conversation and how they would approach it, depending on your character, I guess, how they're gonna get there. So I find
oh,
that kind of
Andrew Moore in the comments, the man behind the curtain is
useful.
getting in on it now. Let's see what he has to say. Be like, tell this fucking guy to shut up. Um, so let's see here. But you said you were working on a book.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about the book that's going to be coming out?
Yeah, it's well, I'm just in the beginning stages. I mean, it's all planned out. I'm just doing that little bit of rough drafting right now, just kind of picking away at it brick by brick. It's loosely based on The Collector by John Fowles.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Box has been checked. The Collector is one of my favorite books
Yes.
of all time. I
So
read
my
that.
thing
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. My thing with The Collector is like when I was a lot more depressed and anxious, it sounded so goddamn appealing. Like, oh, you're gonna put me in a room where everything I want is, and you just want to talk to me a couple times a day. You're gonna bring my shopping list. There's books. There's paper. Really? Like that sounds great. So this is based on a girl in modern times who is an Instagram kind of star, and she gets kidnapped by someone obsessed with her. But secretly, she is really shitty and depressed. And when she gets the opportunity to have some time to herself, she's like, "Hell yes, this sounds great." But also some spooky doppelganger stuff is going on, and
Oh,
some weird
awesome.
reality splits. Both girls in the book are Geminis, and Gemini is the twin sign. So there's just a lot of things going on. I'm really excited about it.
I think that can really be done well. I think that there, for whatever reason, I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure that there's this underlying meaning or statement or whatever that could be made by it, but it seems like in the last 5-10 years or so, there have been shit tons of doppelganger movies.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I'm definitely trying to go in a different direction with it. I think it's going to be pretty neat.
well,
But yeah, doppelgangers are cool.
does the well I that actually brings me back. I haven't talked about this in a long time. One of my most terrifying nightmares as a child, and I am a twin.
Oh,
I
cool.
have a fraternal sister, so to me, one of the scariest nightmares, and it's one of those ones that I can call to memory instantly. I can see exactly what happened in it because it was just at my own home, and I had gone into the garage that was kind of um, like the cave of my dad, who I wasn't really super close to. So it was kind of like this not forbidden because I could kind of walk around there at will, but misunderstood
Mhm.
place down there. And in the nightmare, I just kind of like I see the shape over there, and I pull a blanket away, and it's me.
That is delicious. I love that.
There's another one of me that somehow has been kept secret, and he wasn't hiding. It was almost as if the blanket had been over him like a piece of furniture that you didn't want to get dust on, right? So
Yeah.
to me, I always thought this is meant to replace me. Like, what have I haven't fulfilled the expectations of my family. So this thing is going to take me over, and it wasn't sad to have been there. It was actually triumphant that he was being uncovered by
Yes.
me of all people. So and then it ended.
I love that
So
dream. I love dreams. I love bad dreams. I love spooky dreams. I just think dreams are really, really cool.
I mean, it seems like they're just the the storehouse of everything that you could
Mhm.
ever imagine, and kind of takes place with you. And I was having a lot of trouble sleeping for a couple weeks there. and then for whatever reason, I've kind of I've fallen back into better sleep and really intensely deep dreams lately too.
Nice.
So, but I haven't picked up a pencil to write anything in a while. So maybe now's the time that my dream
Y-
life has gotten a little bit better.
yeah, use them definitely.
Would you say? I mean, sometimes I kind of I guess when things are so, I don't want to say popularized, but when people are like, "Oh, it's so cute to keep a dream journal and keep it right next to your bed," and like all this kind of stuff, I find it really difficult to catalog my dreams and to kind of write my dreams down and stuff for whatever reason. I don't know if it like inside it just feels like that it's meant for the dream life or what the deal is.
I write about my dreams a lot. Like I don't write my dreams down very much. I've tried a few times to do that and it's not a habit that's stuck. I remember them really well though, and especially I don't know some of them stand out more and stick with me. And I think almost everything I've written probably has a little dream bit in it. Like everything has some sort of imagery lifted from a dream.
I mean, what, and also from like memory, right? With
Hmm.
like someone asked, are there any experiences like traumatic experiences that you've used to use to mine for your stories? And
Oh,
just from what you've
absolutely.
said, it's an absolute fact. So
Yeah, I mean, I change like everything I write, almost everything I write has an emotional reality to it. I mean, I've changed it in the story, of course, and I haven't cribbed it directly from life, but something about it is an emotion I went through, definitely.
Ashley Zombie has joined the group. Hey Ashley, what's up? She's the one I think I mentioned the wall hanging, how like the all the podcast jocks from Magic Scroll Network, they've gotten on Teespring and they have all these crazy like items you can get now, and she, for whatever reason, hers is like this zombie hand and it's got this awesome title and stuff, and hers on her ceiling looks so awesome, and I was just like, I wondered, I'm not so sure mine would look that great, but let's see here. I honestly think that we've gotten through a lot of this stuff that people brought. Anyone on tonight, if you have any further questions for Betty, just throw them out there.
Yeah.
We're getting through this stuff pretty good, and even with all the tangents, I love it.
Yeah, I love a good tangent.
Oh boy, we're gonna get along fine because for whatever reason, I think I can kind of juggle a few things. Not, I don't always get back to what I was talking to begin with,
Oh, it doesn't
but
matter. I mean, that's conversation, right? You go where it takes you. It's all good.
yeah, and I'm looking through a lot of these, and like I hoped, you've just kind of naturally answered a lot of these. I guess one of the ones that we haven't talked about, but it kind of seems a moot point with kind of like we were talking about almost the unnecessary nature of like genre and classification when you're
Mm.
trying to tell a story and stuff. But basically, one of them was like any genre that you can see yourself like slipping into in the future. I spoke to Kathy Koja not too long ago, and I remember her writing children's books after the
Yeah.
horror. So, do you see yourself doing that, slipping into another genre at some point?
Um, yeah, I definitely like I feel pretty free with genre. Everything's probably going to have a horror base to it. I would be really surprised to see myself write something that didn't have a little bit of creepiness to it. I could see doing more like light science fiction. I like aliens and that kind of like the Black Mirror kind of style of thing. I can see doing. Possibly like young adult kind of creepy illustrated thing might be fun.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
I would definitely like to do more illustrated stuff or things based around illustration. Like I like Pim and Francie is this comic kind of series drawn in the style of the old cartoons that I really like. And it's just horrifying and disgusting, but it looks like it's going to be a cute little thing, but it's gross. And I'd love to create an effect like that.
And you said Pim and Francie?
Pim and Francie, I think is what it's called. Yeah.
I have to look
It's
around for
just
that.
yeah, it's I forget the name of the artist, but It's really neat stuff. He's an artist in general, and he just put out it's as if it's fragments of a comic series that never was, and it's really gross and weird, and I like that effect. I'd like to do, or even like Edward Gorey style. We were talking about him, how it's mostly based around the illustration, but there might be a little bit of storyline too. I think that would be cool to do.
Um, is there a monster that you like to see brought back to the forefront? I think along with like the Gashly Crumb Tinies and stuff, where Edward Gorey, made no bones about absolutely not necessarily showing children getting killed, but kind of broaching that topic and stuff.
Hmm.
And now, since there's such an emphasis on returning to horror icons that have kind of run their course, but now they're trying to milk them for everything they're worth. Is there a monster that you would like to see brought back to the forefront?
I've always said I think they could do a Nosferatu remake.
Which I think
That
that Doug Jones is on that. I
Oh, is
believe.
that a thing? Cool.
I
Because
believe so. Yeah.
just because like it's such an old film and it is some like I'm not huge on remakes, but that is one that they could do something with because it's been so long, you know. But then I'd probably end up hating it, but who knows?
I guess it
There's that
would
Shadow
depend.
of the Vampire movie though that was about Nosferatu, about the actor, and he was actually a vampire or
Shadow of
something.
the
I haven't seen that
Vampire.
in so
Yeah,
long. Yeah.
had Willem Dafoe in it. That was awesome.
That was yeah. It's been so long since I saw that. It was really cool though. Yeah, I'm gonna say Nosferatu can come back. I always liked like the creature from the lagoon kind of guy. He's cool.
Oh, there you go. So you don't consider Shape of Water having that? I would have thought that would have been right up your alley.
I didn't see that actually. Can you believe it? I should have. I
I
somehow
can
have
believe
missed
that.
that.
I can believe
Yeah.
that. Especially since, like you were saying, with not really being interested in kind of like following trends so highly and stuff. I think that a lot of people, when they're into their own work and into the work of the people that they're like the indie community and stuff like that,
Hmm.
to kind of stay away from the pulse of things. A lot of people
Yeah.
would
It's
find that kind of like not a bad thing to do, but I think in their case, when you're kind of like creating things, I think it might be necessary to keep away from it.
mm. See, it's definitely not a conscious thing that I do. It's more like a time thing. Like I only have enough time to see so many movies and read so many books, and you just pick and choose, and some things slip between the cracks, and some don't.
I I guess that this is kind of another question that might be kind of silly, in light of everything we've talked about. But is there anything that you absolutely would never ever write about?
I can't think of any like hard lines that I have. I can't really think of anything I'd steer away from. What are the big ones? What are things people don't want to write about?
Well, it's hard to say because at first I was gonna say like child death and stuff, but then Pet
Oh
Cemetery
my
right
God,
on those.
everything I write is about child death. I've killed so many kids in my stuff. It's almost
Yeah,
like
I don't
a
know, and that kind of like comes back around to I'd mentioned
oh, I
cat.
thought of one.
Oh,
I
okay.
I will probably never write a cat death because I just don't think it's necessary in fiction, and in my fiction, it will be a place of safety for cats.
Oh, cats safe all over the world. Yeah,
No one else will be safe in it, but the cats will probably be safe.
all of a sudden I saw Black Sad like throwing up taking a cigarette out and throwing you a thumbs up, but and we talked about that. That's so awesome. But um, when I it was great because you and I have been talking about curse passages and stuff, and I saw that Kathy Koja was in your friends list, so I was like, I've wanted to talk to her since the beginning of everything.
Hmm.
So I ended up friend requesting her, and I talked. Actually, Angela's gone now, but Angela and I had talked about Skin and Strange Angels and Bad Brains and stuff in the basement of this bookshop, the Bookery in Fairborn, where all these people are from. And I messaged her, and she accepted me, and I wanted to ask her one question, and I'll ask you the same question, which is I think I lost it. But basically, the question is: do you think that in the 21st century, where we're at now, do you think it's possible to write a loathsome character anymore?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Um, I feel like you have to go in different directions though than the expected ones. But I don't see why it's easy to create someone to hate. It's almost harder to create a flawed, likable character. Do you know what I mean? It's easy to create someone horrible.
What about on the other end of it? What about a villain that's likable? Because, I mean, you have to
Yeah.
think about some of the greatest villains of all time. They say that I've heard a lot about like sympathetic villains are the thing. But if you think about it, Hannibal Lecter isn't even close to being a sympathetic character.
Mm-mm.
But at the same time, people cite him as one of the greatest horror villains that's ever existed. So the
I
question
think
is like, can you know what you know about a character and yet still find them and not even have it be like a loving to hate thing? You're actually loving to love them and they're a
yeah, that's
loathsome character.
I think that is a very, very cool thing to create. And actually, I think one of the girls in the book I'm working on, I'm trying to do a little bit of that effect with her. Um, 'Cause yeah, I think that's cool when you can create someone who's horrible, but just something about them sucks you in. 'Cause there's people like that in real life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us have met people like that that really have that some kind of charisma, even though there's just a lot about them that is terrible and affects you badly. So yeah, that's a great kind of villain to write about.
And I guess really when you think about it, I mean, if that wouldn't have been the case, then would Dracula had ever have
Mhm.
ever come about? Because there's such an air of hypnotism and doing things against your will, but yet being seduced and damned, and
Mhm.
feeding on something that would have been abhorrent to you beforehand. So I guess that's almost vital if you want to have a
Mhm.
good villain. You almost have
I think
to.
because like in Dracula, definitely like, and in with Hannibal Lecter, the villains definitely outshine the protagonists in those. Like those are the characters you remember more. So I mean, of course, we remember Clarice, but there's just something so vitable about him. It wouldn't be the same without him. Whereas you could maybe play around with your protagonist.
I guess my next question is, do you find yourself including villains in your stories?
Including villains.
Is the villain more the situation than a personification of one?
A lot of times, like for instance, in Writhing Skies, I mean, the supernatural villain is like the skies and the aliens and stuff, but really I would consider the villain of that book Derek, who is the
Oh yeah,
ex-boyfriend. Like he's a piece of shit. He's the villain. But so yeah, the horror of what's going on is something different. And yeah, I do work with environment a lot, like in like Jagged Teeth, the environment. Papa's the villain, but the apartment itself is almost a character.
and yet again, something from kind of taken from life, right? Not necessarily like the personification of the person that had kind of exited your life and had all this stuff to do with like Jagged Teeth, but not necessarily being the same person.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that was like Jagged Teeth. I got directly from like a dream I had. The beginning of the book is Jacqueline's walking down the street and some people are harassing her and her grandfather pulls up to save her, but her grandfather's been dead for years. And that was a dream I had about my grandfather and that the book just totally grew from there.
But do you find it interesting that that character is the person that you would consider the villain in that story, when it's kind of indirectly inspired by someone that you cared a lot about?
Um well, I guess like the core, it was interesting playing with that because it was like kind of more like a weird demon thing that was using her grandfather as a mask,
Oh,
I
I
guess,
see.
the
Okay.
idea. But playing, you don't know that through the whole book. So yeah, playing with the idea of someone you love being a villain was definitely interesting to work with. Yeah.
And how many people don't have someone they love that's a villain in their life in some capacity at some point,
Oh
not
God,
being
yeah.
slighted or whatever by someone that you loved, whether it be family or some kind of new addition to your family. Uh,
Well, yeah, that's like one of the biggest fears I think for people, and it's something that's easy to be paranoid about. Like, what you can never really know who someone is. You know, you can't get right inside their head, so anyone can be anything.
Do you think that that informs your work, especially when you're trying to not necessarily, like you said, anthropomorphize, but like personalize some of these creatures that can have a lot of attributes of people that you'd meet, but on the other hand, are completely like a million years away?
Sorry, can you? What do you mean?
Do you find that do you find that when you try to kind of employ that, you know, the person you love, the you never quite know someone, all that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. Do you find that difficult to do when you're talking about a creature that you can see as a creature, but kind of has these uh, like a familiarity of the human that would allow someone to enter in a relationship with them? Does that kind of like destroy that, or do you find that people see no longer see the spider next door? Like, oh, after a while, do you find that your readers find that she kind of ceases to be a spider as much as she is a personality and something that he's kind of wrapped up in?
And that wrapped up in is a good. I don't know if you meant that to be a pun,
I
but wrapped
didn't.
up.
It just happened. It just happened. I wish I could take responsibility for that, but no.
With that one, I really, like I was saying, I wanted to keep the alienness very apparent, so it's almost at odds with the emotional connection you're feeling. And then this
That sounds like a
strange
challenge.
thing happened. It was fun and cool though. As far as with human characters, I do really like working with secrets and the fact that you can never really know someone because, you know, we're all these separate little consciousness, and you know, you trust and you try to get to know someone. But I don't know. I think it's interesting and cool.
Do you think that someday that you're going to write a true gothic novel with like the castle and, you know, the
Oh no, I don't know. I don't like the past. I told you, the castles are so
and
the
yet,
past.
but see, I keep kind of bringing that up because on one hand you say you don't like the past, but then you're completely immersed in Betty Boop and Popeye and stuff,
Oh
and
my God, that's
how
an
could you
excellent point.
how could you
Oh my,
possibly not have
you
some kind of
you have found my one hypocrisy. Yeah, that is a mess. I never
oh,
thought of it
I
that
wouldn't
way.
call it hypocrisy at all,
No,
not
I wasn't
whatsoever.
really worried about it.
Um, and maybe it's one of those things where, you know, maybe this is a perfect kind of like expression of that, where you do rail against these outdated modes of storytelling and stuff, and yet you have this deep affinity for these old cartoons and whimsical yet creepy things. So like it just kind of like and adds a new kind of like a new depth to that that you know
If
you could
I'm
explore
ever
over time.
gonna write, like, to write something about like old cartoons from that era, I can't picture fully immersing myself in a different era to write. It would be more so bringing something out of that past into the modern time, I think.
Okay,
But I mean, you know, I'm only 35. I've only been writing for a few years. You know, who knows what'll take my interest in a couple of years.
it's hard to say. I mean, if you let's see, so you're gonna the doppelganger. That is, I'm totally. It kind of. This is one of those definite moments where it seems like this already exists, but it doesn't quite exist yet. So I'm really dying to see this thing that hasn't been fully formed yet.
Yeah, I
But
am too.
uh,
Honestly, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm just chipping away at it now. I'm hoping to put it out next year. We'll see how it goes.
well, I know everybody here will be keeping an eye out for it. Is there anything
I'm
that
gonna
you've had to cut away from it that kind of made you sad?
to cut away from.
Like from your original thought of what you were doing with this particular story, was there something that you wanted? I guess one of those darlings again. Something you wanted so badly to put in there, but then you realized that it just was not going to work, and you just had to cut it away.
There was something like that that happened recently. No, I don't know. See, I do so much of that work in my brainstorming stage, and everything's very like free flowing then and malleable. So I'll get a lot of ideas that I'll like plan out a 4 or 5 steps ahead and be like, no. And you know, sometimes I'm doing my plotting for a couple weeks based on one idea, and then I end up cutting it out completely. But yeah, things are so malleable that I can't really pinpoint anything that I would be like, oh, I wish if I want it bad enough, I'll keep it. I'll find a way, I think.
I love the idea of this planned fluidity thing where
Hmm.
uh, in one breath you're kind of like, yeah, I need to have this framework in place, and I brainstorm to the point where I have these definite beats and this definite architecture, everything's going on. But at the same time, then you want to kind of be able to be light on your feet. That way, if something has to be kind of like shifted or whittled or maybe even like transformed or whatever, but still keep the same tonal
Yeah,
chords,
well,
like they have to be able to do
because
it.
I feel like when you're planning a book, like there's a lot of little parts to it. So I want to figure out all those parts first, so that I don't get, halfway written or like 20,000 words into something and be like, oh, this is going to be a hot mess if I keep going in this direction and now I have to edit like crazy. I'd rather look at each of those pieces and then figure out then if it's going to work, and if it's not, why. And then I can move the pieces around. And it is very, very fluid while I'm planning. And then when I'm editing, things are a little more, that's when you can really get into the prose and making it really sing and finding the right emphasis in each part. It's just the actual writing that sucks.
And yeah, I was about to say, editing is your real. That's when you really start to rock and roll.
I love editing. That's my favorite part of it. Or I don't know, brainstorming and editing are my favorite parts. The two are beautiful.
Have you ever gotten rid of anything or not? I keep saying getting rid of. Have you ever moved something to the side during the editing process that you've ended up picking up for another work?
Um, no, not really. Like I haven't really my editing's generally pretty straightforward, and I think it's because I've done so much planning in the first place. And also, I don't like putting in a lot of backstory, and that's usually what people end up having to work around in their editing, I think, to make their backstory not so boring. So if you don't put it in the first place, you're good.
I think that the 21st century is obsessed with backstory.
Man,
Um,
people love backstory.
I think that they've
I
been trained to love it.
I love to know my backstory and hint at it, and I think that's enough. Like,
But I think that you
there's just,
can. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I like the idea of having. I don't know. I like when I'm reading to have the idea that there's a whole past history, and but you're just seeing little bits of it, because I don't know. It fills in better that way, and it feels more real than just having it be like, well, here's a big text dump of all the things you need to know for this to make sense.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know?
I think that if you like what you were saying, you were using you weren't saying reading or seeing or knowing. You were saying feeling.
Mhm.
So I think that when you and that goes along with the dialogue too. You can say so much with dialogue without
Mhm.
actually saying the words. So if you can
And yeah,
allude,
yeah, you have to trust your reader a little bit, because I certainly notice when an author is hammering me in the head with something and making it so apparent, and then it doesn't have the same effect as if I kind of fill that in on my own while I'm reading it.
yeah, and I think that um, there something's been lost. The interaction with the reader gets lost if you, just like I was saying with that prologue that I'm getting in so much trouble for. When something is absolutely told to you, and then it's explained the way you're supposed to take it, and then it's explained the way that you're supposed to feel about it, at some point um, you kind of taking the puzzle pieces of your heart and plugging it in to the story where you may not have like a concrete answer, that all goes away and you cease to be part of the story anymore after that
Yeah,
if everything's explained.
yeah, definitely. I think the interaction between the reader and the text is really important, and that's something that authors should keep in mind. Like, I don't know, people don't want things spoon fed to them.
Don't they? I'm not so sure about that sometimes, especially with the advent of the internet. I think that a lot of people want things absolutely explained bit for bit.
People love to analyze things on the internet too and explain it to each other, and people like being right about things, and that's fine.
So
Different people like.
you don't
Oh,
feel
go ahead.
touched by that?
What do you mean?
You don't feel touched by that in your work as a writer if someone like let's say they completely misunderstand something that you've put out there, and they see it in a certain way, and then they expect to be proven, or not necessarily proven wrong, but explained that in one way or another they've misunderstood it. And that would, like you said, like people love being right, especially on the internet. So
Mhm.
if you were like, for instance, I read something about Ray Bradbury being like so confused that people saw Fahrenheit 451 as this great work about censorship when he was actually talking about television, like rotting the
Oh,
brains of society and stuff. So, like when things like that happen, I mean, do you think that you would you be tempted to just explain it word for word, like your entire thought
oh
process and
God,
what you
no.
expected?
I mean, if someone wanted to ask me, absolutely, I would tell them what I intended. But if someone interprets it differently than I intended, I actually just think that's really interesting. Because like once you write it, it's kind of out of your hands in a way, and it's not. You can never write anything that someone's going to 100% get exactly from you because it was written from me, and your perspective on the world is going to change how you take it in. Like someone told me once that with like Jagged Teeth, they really felt a really heavy like sexual threatening mood from it, and I didn't feel like I wrote that in at all, but I thought it was interesting that they took that from it. So yeah, I just think it's kind of neat how people interact with things, and I'd always be happy to explain stuff, but I don't feel like I need to, and it doesn't bother me if someone takes it a different way.
Do you think that would cheapen it if you had to explain it?
No, I don't think. I mean, I would hope that it doesn't need to be explained, and I would feel like maybe I hadn't done my job if someone read something and
I
got
think that's
something.
the danger. I think that's the
Yeah.
danger of all this, when you feel as if, even though you've lived with this thing for more than a year, and you've poured over every single word, every single nuance of it, and all of a sudden you feel responsible for the way someone else took something that they're
Mhm.
supposed to be a part of. It's a weird it's a weird thing, especially now. It seems like there's so much blame leveled on the creators of things. Um, I mean,
Well, it's
when
just
you're
it's so much more accessible now, like for us to get real-time responses from people or for people to put their opinion out there. Whereas like, I don't know, 20 years ago, if someone read my stuff and didn't get it, I would probably never know. But now with the internet, it's much, much different and everyone can be very loud and
do you
opinionated.
do you think that enhances the craft, or do you think that it pulls away from it?
I think it could do either, really. It depends on how you let yourself be affected by it.
You mean in the case of the author? You mean?
Yes, yeah. In the case of the reader, I mean, people have to kind of decide for themselves with that. Like, some people can, like, read a book and read it and just enjoy it in themselves, but then other people want to read everything that's ever been written about it, and then other people want to know every single Easter egg, and everyone just enjoys things differently or gets different things out of it, and I think that's fine.
Well, I think that you've definitely shown yourself to be unflappable, and definitely not necessarily untouched, but kind of unbowed by a lot of things that might come out, especially in it can be a real vicious time when it
Oh
comes
God,
to that
yeah.
sort of thing now.
I
So
think
I
that's why you kind of have to be unflappable with that stuff. I mean, like, I can't control other people in any way. All I can do is what I'm doing. So
I
I'm
think
just
that
gonna
one thing
do
that
that.
happens with that kind of sucks though is that there becomes like this blindness though sometimes,
Mhm.
which I don't think you'll be victim to, because it seems to me that you would have a really super intimate relationship with anyone who want to talk about your work. But I think with a lot of people, they think that in order to deflect some sort of negativity, which I think is over. I think negativity is overassessed. I think that in a lot of ways, critique is just seen as negativity from the very
Mm.
beginning, which is silly. But I think that if you can engage with it and you can discuss it and you can have a conversation about it, instead of just going, "Well, that's your opinion," and just kind of like turning your nose away. I think it's really important to engage someone, especially if they hate you for
Mhm.
whatever reason, for whatever you've done or whatever. So
I always find
Um,
it a little embarrassing when people are like complaining about reviews on Facebook and stuff like, "Oh, this person hated my book," and like they get so upset about it, and it's like there's so many people out there. Of course, someone hates. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and
not
at least
everyone.
it's an emotional response in
Yeah,
some kind of way.
and critique's great. Like, not all critique is critique that you have to evaluate it. I'll definitely always think about people's critiques, and I reach out to better readers a lot, and I would like to have harsh critique if it's needed, but some of it works with what I'm doing, some of it doesn't, and I think that's fine. Just by virtue of being critique doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make it wrong
Hmm.
either just because I don't like it. So you
Yeah,
got to
that's
find the grain of truth in there.
that's totally vital. So, all of that being said, all of these wild tangents in this fantastic conversation. Um, and hi, Mary. By the way, I meant to say hi to Mary.
Hi,
She came
Mary.
on a long time ago. Um, my final question of the night, because I've kept you almost past your bedtime as it is.
Oh, you have it. It
Um,
was getting late there.
I think that my last question is: do you find that any of your works, out of everything you've ever done, would you say that there is one quintessential Betty Rocksteady story that just personifies your entire career just in one package?
I definitely think Writhing Skies is the one for that. Like I don't know, it's such a weird book. So much like dream imagery is a big thing for me. Horrible traumatic past is a big thing for me. Goopy weird monsters, weird sex. Yeah, I would say Writhing Skies. Oh, and it has drawings in it. It has weird almost kind of that Betty Boop style as sort of a contrast to all the horrible stuff that's going on. I think it's definitely a weird Betty Rocksteady thing. And it's actually, if anyone's looking to pick it up, I believe it's still on sale on the Perpetual Motion Machine website with this is Rocksteady code, 10% off.
Ooh, okay, yeah. Everybody, use the code. This is Rocksteady at Perpetual Motion Machine. Is it publishing or press?
Publishing.
Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing. Use the This Is Rocksteady code to get your copy of The Rising Skies by Betty Rocksteady. 10% off. Go there at your soonest opportunity. Look at all of her stuff there. Look at Max Booth's stuff. In fact, look at the entire catalog. Dark Moon Digest. It's just great fun. Definitely check out the Castle Rock podcast.
Oh, Max has a new podcast out too, Ghoulish. The first episode
I did see that. Brian Keene was
yeah,
on that, right?
Brian
Yeah.
Keaton and
So
Mother Horror was on it too. Yeah, it's really funny. Max is a funny guy, so
I'm
I
sorry.
think people
Who
will
else
like
was
it.
on there?
Mother Horror about I think her name's Sadie Hartman.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's correct,
Okay.
but they were talking about horror bookstagramming or something.
I'm sorry.
Um,
What?
Or
Bookstagramming.
bookstagramming. I guess on Instagram, a lot of people do like really elaborate set pieces of photos with a
Oh.
book and stuff. So that's what they. I haven't listened to that one yet,
Is that
but
considered like a book trailer, sort of?
I think it's just photos. But as I'm not
Oh,
an
like a
Instagrammer,
tableau type
I'm
of thing.
not quite sure.
Yeah, I was looking around for that because I was going to share my little, like the updated, tonight at 7 p.m. Better Rocksteady, and nowhere to be found. You got to be careful though. On Instagram, there are a lot of names that are kind of similar to yours, so you're going to have to do something about that when you get over there.
But yeah, I should really get on. Instagram's one of those things I've been meaning to make happen, but like, social media already eats up a good chunk of my time. So I just
Uh,
like it. I like you guys so much.
well, there you go. But hey, yeah, definitely go to Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing. Use This Is Rocksteady code for 10% off The Writhing Skies by Betty Rocksteady. I have to say, without a doubt, this has been an absolute blast to have you over.
Yeah, I had
Um,
a lot of fun.
and yeah, and Dreams We Rot will be coming out in
October.
October. So I am looking. I'm looking to ask her back again if she'll come back around and
Oh
talk
yeah, I'd
about
love
that,
to.
and if I can come up with any other crazy questions or any sort of updates on any of her work anywhere. Hopefully by that time, there might be something on Cursed Passages. We'll see. It's been a little bit of a delay on that, but I have no doubt that that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, that would be super cool. I'm excited.
So yeah, thanks again for coming out. I wanted to let's see. Is there any final? I think that was my final thing. I just wanted to see if there was anything that kind of summed you up in one fail swoop on that one. So yeah, let's see. What do you got planned for the rest of the weekend?
I work on the weekends, so I am gonna just chill out for a little bit. Probably look at Facebook and read a little bit and go to bed. Tomorrow I am typing all day, going for a walk, doing bet stuff.
You know,
How about you?
I'd have to say, oh well, I think it's just going to be a blank slate. I was gearing up so much for this that I didn't have anything planned for tomorrow. It's going to be lazy times, but Monday I will be back for another non-entry episode with the Choose Your Own Adventure. I think this one, where did he put him? I don't know where he put him. But the next one I think will be like the Case of the Creepy Coffins. I've been doing these Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventure live with audience participation.
That
So
sounds really fun.
yeah, if you're in the neighborhood, Monday I guess it would be, oh, it'd be a little bit late. It'd probably be in the 11s.
Ooh, in the 11s, that's past my bed. I usually go to bed at 11:30.
Oh well, maybe
This is the
sometime.
first time in my life I've had a good sleep schedule for the last year or so. It's amazing.
And of course I'm wrecking it. But yeah, anyway, so let's see. Go to BettyRocksteady.com. Check out all of her illustrations. She does commissions as well, so definitely check that out. Is there anything else you want me to mention? Oh, let me one more thing before you go. Popcasting, the Vintage Popeye comic podcast featuring Troy Blackwood.
We
Was
think
that
of it, I think
something
so.
like that? Troy and Betty Rocksteady talking about these fantastic Popeye comics from the beginning of time. I didn't even know he went through. I totally recommend that first episode.
Oh my God, it
Actually,
was so fun. He knows so much.
it's so interesting to me knowing where that Popeye kind of was an accidental, but so many things are. So
Like
many things
I
are.
felt so lucky to be like I was just so like I love that so much and I just felt so lucky to be involved in it and hear all that cool stuff. Like I just find Popeye very interesting.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. I actually I just found this one tangents again. Sorry, you're not getting loose. I found this podcast called Plot Points, and
Cool.
it's actually about kind of like the inner workings of Dungeons and Dragons. And they had a couple of episodes called Appendix N, where I guess in the original literature for Dungeons and Dragons, like the manual or something, it had this appendix called Appendix N, and in that appendix, this is great. This is great. I found out about this completely from the podcast. I feel like silly about it, but in the back they had this Appendix N, and in the appendix it listed every work that he had used as an inspiration for Dungeons and Dragons at the very beginning, and in these Appendix N episodes of Plot Points, they meet with professors that study like pulp fiction and like weird tales and stuff and Lovecraft, and how they study that as kind of like the beginnings of Dungeons and Dragons, and it was fascinating
Yeah, that
hearing
sounds
about
awesome.
like all the literature that led to the creation of that. And there are a lot of great podcasts out there, people. Keep an eye out, because there's some fantastic things that you can find out about and immerse yourself in if you need the time sucked out of your life where you look up and all of a sudden you're 43 and you're like, holy crap, what just happened?
But
But
now I
hey,
know a lot about Popeye, so it's very worth it.
but when you pass over, you will know that you were interested in something. And I think a lot of people are bored with life. And
But there's so much cool stuff.
all I can say to them is like, I don't know where your mind is at, because I am never bored. Especially when I'm on the Diabolical Index with Betty Rocksteady. So with that, I'm going to wish you a good night yet again. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming
you
out
too.
so much.
Thanks so much, everybody, for like hanging out and asking questions.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have there's gonna be an influx that like you wouldn't believe. I'm sure they're all gonna check you out
I'm very
immediately
excited. I
post
hope.
haste. So, thanks. I'm never gonna be able to say everybody that stopped by. It was a fantastic turnout tonight for Betty, and I didn't want to forget to let you know that Juice in the Morning is on Magic Scroll Network as well. They are the podcast of the month, and he's the closest thing we've got to a male model. So definitely go check him out and all their crazy hijinks. And again, I want to reiterate this again. Definitely go to Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing. This is Rocksteady. 10% off The Writhing Skies by Betty Rocksteady. Betty, thank you so much for stopping by. And
Thank
we
you
will
so
see you
much.
again. This is like the second ending. It's like Lord of the Rings or something. But we will definitely be asking you back around October. Since it's Halloween, I don't know
Yeah.
who will be
That's
available and
perfect
stuff.
time.
But I'll see what we can work out and get you back in October for the release of And Dreams We Wrought.
Sounds great.
Is it like Trepidatious
Yeah,
Press?
Trepidato, I think. It is.
Trepidato? I was close.
I
Trepidato
think I might be
Press.
saying it wrong. It's all good.
But that's all good. But anyway, thanks again, and get some good sleep, get some dreams and those inspirations for
Yeah.
stories.
All right,
Alrighty?
cool. Good night.
All right, see you later.
See ya.
All right, everybody. This has been Diabolical Index for June 8th, 2019, where the pages of the uncanny reside. And I will be back on Monday for the next non-entry episode with Choose Your Own Adventure from Goosebumps yet again. And hey, as always, keep it squirrely.